Chapter 760. Aurora's status in the Freedom City was extremely special. She had been intelligent since she was young, and she had already followed her mother to deal with the household affairs. She was also beautiful and soft like a meatball, and people couldn't help but like her. At that time, the conditions in the Freedom City were tough, and everyone clenched their teeth to survive. Suddenly, such a little girl appeared, and she naturally became the spiritual anchor in the eyes of countless people. They really thought that she would melt in their mouths and break in their hands. In her mother's heart, she was the continuation of her husband's bloodline, and she had perfectly inherited the appearance and characteristics of the moon elf swordsman. She was the most caring and cute little moon. But in the hearts of the citizens of the Freedom City, she was the successor of the Sun Warrior, the little sun that warmed their hearts. Thus, she had two names for herself internally and externally. But whether it was Little Moon or Little Sun, they were full of overflowing love. Tiger, who was also Aurora's uncle who had been in position since the founding of the city. It could be said that he was the first member of the Sun Warriors team. Like most of the elders, he doted on Aurora like she was his own daughter. Now that Little Sun had returned from studying in the legendary Holy Land of Scholars, Tiger was naturally very happy. But the current Freedom City was not harmonious. The situation in the city seemed the same as usual, but there were hidden dangers that could not be lightly told to outsiders. Website https://m Vipkanshu. VIP. Fortunately, the professors of the Shang Malian Academy came with Little Sun. Tiger was pleasantly surprised, and his gaze quickly swept across the professors. The professors of the Shang Malian Academy rarely walked outside. Even if they did, they would mostly hide their identities, so Tiger naturally couldn't recognize them. But whether it was Professor Shi Erfu or Professor Cheong Si, they all exuded an unusually powerful aura. With these professors, perhaps the current crisis can be alleviated? With this thought, he warmly welcomed the professors into the city. Then, he saw his little son run to the side of a golden-haired youth. Who is that? Tiger still maintained his enthusiasm, but his eyes were already flashing with sharpness. 13 people. That little fairy shouldn't be one, so including Little Sun, there should be 3 students. After calming down from his initial excitement, Tiger's thoughts were abnormally clear. Then, he realized a very important problem. Professor, student, and maid? Why did they come to the Freedom City? The news in the city shouldn't have leaked. They can't be accompanying Little Sun home to visit his family, right? If it's just accompanying students for training, this teacher-student ratio doesn't seem right. Tiger suddenly realized that he might have been thinking too simply. Regardless of what this Tiger Man mixed blood thought, the group of 13 finally entered the city. With Tiger personally leading the way, the journey was smooth and unobstructed, heading straight to the city lord's manor. The professors saw that the situation was not right, so they did not have the mood to play. However, they naturally wouldn't ignore the scenery of the Freedom Capital on the way. They could still see the scenery inside the Freedom Capital. Aurora walked beside Dake. Whenever she sensed that Dake was puzzled by something, she would explain it to him in a low voice. Although her cheeks were red, she still fulfilled her role as a tour guide. However, the more Dake walked, the more puzzled he became. The city guards have sealed off the city, and no one is allowed to enter or leave. Why is the city still the same? His gaze swept over the hurried adventurers, the loudly hawking street vendors, and occasionally paused on a few pastors he met by chance. For a moment, he couldn't guess what had happened in this city. I'll ask when we reach the city lord's manor. He calmed down. After walking through the initial road, they changed into a carriage and walked on the main road, rolling in the direction of the city lord's manor. The 5 dragons also took off and followed at a low altitude. When the city lord's manor was first built, it was located in the center of the inner city. However, the inner city wasn't in the center of the entire city. It was further east. In other words, it was closer to the east gate. Therefore, after half an hour, the carriage went straight into the inner city. After another half an hour, they arrived in front of the city lord's manor. The 5 dragons were temporarily arranged in the nearby square. The group of 13 entered the city lord's manor. Is this your home? Dake carefully memorized the route into the manor and asked casually. However, Aurora nodded vigorously in agreement. She looked extremely solemn. Everyone walked quickly. After walking for 3 minutes into the manor, City Lord Montefiore suddenly appeared and greeted them with a surprised expression. As for how surprised and happy she was, that was something that only she knew. Su Montefiore. Just call me Su Na. City Lord Montefiore held Professor Shi Erfu's hand. Sarah Shi Erfu, Vice Principal of Shang Malian Academy. Professor Shi Erfu also gave a brief self-introduction. Welcome. Welcome. The two parties didn't stop in the corridor. City Lord Montefiore personally led the way and entered the conference hall. The City Lord's manor was the residence of the City Lord. The administrative affairs were handled in the administrative hall. However, sometimes for convenience, City Lord Montefiore would also hold meetings in the City Lord's manor. Therefore, there were offices and conference halls. The conference hall was the only place in the City Lord's manor that had a long table. However, the dining table in the manor's dining hall was only a small table that could accommodate 4 people. Therefore, City Lord Montefiore chose to receive her guests in the conference hall and eat directly in the conference hall. When they walked into the conference hall, cutlery and tea were already placed on the long table used for meetings. There weren't many servants in the manor. The servant in charge of receiving the guests hurriedly returned to the kitchen to continue helping after setting up the cutlery. In the blink of an eye, Aurora became the host and poured tea for everyone present. It was only then that everyone began to formally introduce themselves. After City Lord Montefiore memorized everyone's names, she cautiously said, "I wonder if you can tell me why you are all here?" Professor Shi Erfu changed the topic and said, "I see that there are some abnormalities in the city. I wonder what exactly happened in the City of Freedom?" Both sides asked and looked at each other. Then, they were both disappointed and speechless. "Fine, I'll tell you." Professor Montefiore turned to look at Aurora. After seeing her nod, she looked at Dake and Olga. Only then did she make up her mind to say it. All this time, the City of Freedom had only relied on itself to maintain its purity. Even the Duke's Manor and the Shang Malian Academy, who were kind to it, only supported it from behind and didn't actually do anything. However, if today's matter wasn't resolved in time, it would have an unpredictable negative impact on this isolated city in the demon race's territory. Even if it was for the sake of the hybrids in the city who believed in them, she couldn't be stubborn anymore. Since the Shang Malian Academy's professors happened to be here, she had no reason not to ask for help. Seeing that the City Lord had finally agreed, the hybrid Tiger Man Tyke also secretly sighed in relief. He thought that with the help of the Shang Malian Academy's professors, there was finally hope for that matter. However, after making up her mind, she was very particular about how she should say it and where she should start. City Lord Montefiore had a clean and straightforward personality. However, after becoming the City Lord, she had already learned to be cautious. After pondering for a long time, she said with deliberation, "There are demons." The professors suddenly frowned. City Lord Montefiore said solemnly, "Demons have infiltrated our city." After saying this, City Mistress Montefiore nervously observed the expressions of the people seated in the room. The fewer words there were, the more serious the situation was. It was no small matter that remnants of the demon race had infiltrated the City of Freedom. If this happened in any other city in the kingdom, it would be a matter of mutual hatred. However, it was different in the City of Freedom. If the incident was leaked out and caused a rather large negative influence in the city, the wolves, tigers, and leopards that had been coveting the outpost base in the first place would certainly be attracted and couldn't wait to bare their fangs and claws. The presence of demons in the city was a perfectly justifiable reason to send troops. At this point, the City of Freedom didn't even have the right to refuse. Once foreign troops entered the city, it would be difficult for the City of Freedom to maintain its sovereignty. Before there was really no other way out, this matter couldn't be opened. There were actually 2 external forces present at the scene. One was the Shang Malian Academy led by Professor Shi Erfu, and the other was the Duke's Mansion led by Dake. They were both forces that were trustworthy to a certain extent. They were probably the only two forces that didn't need to worry about being eroded. However, due to her overprotective mentality towards the City of Freedom, City Lord Montefiore was still a bit nervous. However, after saying this, she was extremely surprised to find that this group of people didn't have much surprise on their faces. Was it because this group of people had a strong ability to control their emotions? That probably wasn't the case. City Lord Montefiore's pupils suddenly contracted. She wasn't stupid and immediately guessed that this group of people had traveled thousands of miles to come here because of the demons. This meant that the situation in her mind was likely to be more serious than she had originally estimated. "Tell us the details," Professor Shi Erfu said slowly, his words having the power to calm people's hearts. City Lord Montefiore started to waver again. Dake suddenly said, "Aunt Montefiore, let's start from when we returned here in June last year. In addition to the appearance of the demons, I also want to know more about the situation in this city." Aurora sat down beside him again and looked at her mother with a teacup in her hand. Dake's thoughts were also her thoughts. Her understanding of the City of Freedom had been cut off since June last year. At that time, she had already foreseen the pressure that the City of Freedom would bear in the future, but that pressure should have come from the increasing number of magic beasts. The establishment of the Adventurers Guild in the City of Freedom and the opening of welfare policies to attract a large number of adventurers was one of the strategies that had been formulated to deal with the magic beast tide. Now, from the large number of adventurers that could be seen on the streets, this strategy should have been effective. However, the final results seemed to be different from what she had imagined. The specifics should start from the Demon King's execution ceremony. City Lord Montefiore supported her chin and finally found an angle to narrate. However, she didn't expect that her simple opening would attract a bigger reaction than revealing that the demons had infiltrated the city. The Demon King's execution ceremony. Ophelia Bullard couldn't help but clench her fingers tightly with shame in her eyes. She was the cause of everything, the real beginning of all these things that had happened. The expressions of Professor Shi Erfu and the others also became more serious. City Lord Montefiore quickly retracted her gaze from Ophelia Blood and continued, "That's right. The Demon King's execution ceremony held by the Holy Church in the middle of last year attracted a large number of remnants of the demons who were hiding in the dark. The demons' territory is huge, and they can't be exterminated. Most of them are hiding in the vast and boundless demons' territory. Although they are few in number, they are a great threat. As for our city, because it is located in the demons' territory and is the City of Freedom that doesn't have any restrictions, it has always been a mix of good and bad, and order is difficult to control. From the very beginning, we were unable to make preparations to prevent the demons from infiltrating. Naturally, we became their first foothold after they came out of the rat hole. In addition, the number of demons has increased in the past few years, and the number of beast tides attacking the city has also gradually increased. The City of Freedom has actually been operating in a state of overload, and it has already been overwhelmed, giving them an opportunity to take advantage of. Therefore, since June last year, there have been occasional signs of the demons in the city. We secretly searched for the demons, but the demons are dead but not yet dead, so the results of the search and capture were minimal. During the Demon King's execution ceremony, the Holy Church caught and captured a large number of remnants of the demons, which alerted the enemy and affected the City of Freedom, which was thousands of miles away. The demons hiding in the city became more and more secretive, and it was difficult to find them. But if that's all, it's actually good. The hiding of one or two demons actually won't have much of an impact on the City of Freedom structure. However, since August last year, the signs of the demons' activities suddenly increased. City Lord Montefiore's voice gradually became lower. She slowly recounted the many events that had happened in the City of Freedom in the past 6 months, and her eyes gradually turned cold. Dake and the others listened in silence, and didn't say a word. The waiter who came with the dining cart was blocked by Tiger. City Lord Montefiore continued, "The outbreak caught people off guard, and by the time we discovered it, many residents had already disappeared. And this phenomenon was even more serious among the adventurers. Adventurers are a profession that hangs their heads on their belts, and it's not surprising that they die on the way to carrying out missions. Naturally, they became the targets of the demons' attacks. A large number of adventurers disappeared on the way out of the city to suppress the demons, but they were all treated as normal deaths. It wasn't until someone discovered that the wounds on the adventurers' corpses didn't look like they were caused by the demons that an official investigation was opened. I didn't expect that this investigation would lead to the demons. After realizing that the demons had begun to move, we took many measures, and the demons' actions increased, which also made them reveal more flaws. During that time, we finally found and killed a lot of demons, but we couldn't leave any alive. They were very terrifying, and they would choose to commit suicide after being caught, and they would choose to die together when there was no way to escape. But fortunately, after that, they were silent for a long time, as if they had already killed enough people. This situation has continued until now, and the demons have become active again. Moreover, the activity this time is much more difficult to deal with than in the past. What we've already confirmed is that there's a race among them that can disguise themselves as humans, and they've already begun to infiltrate the city's management system. Chapter 761. If the internal management system was infiltrated, it would cause incalculable damage to the Freedom Capital. The reason why the Freedom Capital was able to reach where it was today was because of the people's hearts. The hybrids all saw this place as their home. They were united and gave their all, regardless of the cost. That was how this huge and sturdy city was built today. Once there was a crisis in this mutual trust, there would be a crack in the foundation of the Freedom Capital. That had to be avoided. City Lord Montefiore summarized the current situation of the Freedom Capital as quickly as possible. Dake and the others finally knew why the East Gate was sealed. While everyone was deep in thought, City Lord Montefiore clapped her hands gently. The servants waiting outside the door pushed the cart in and placed the food on the table. There weren't many types of food, mostly meat. Together with bread and vegetable soup, as well as the Freedom Capital's specialty lemon tea, this was the lunch in the City Lord's mansion. City Lord Montefiore restrained her emotions and said with a smile, "Try it. These are all edible meats that we carefully selected from the magical beasts. In order to process these magical beast meats, we specially rented some priests from the saint who are good at using purification magic to ensure that the remaining magic energy in the magical beast meat is completely removed. Speaking of which, the cooking method of softening and fining the meat of these magical beasts was invented by Aurora. It has now been used on a large scale in the Freedom Capital." Magical beast meat? Turning magical beasts into ingredients and changing their identities from prey to hunters was indeed a good method. He just didn't know the taste of this magical beast meat. It was already past noon. Although the people present weren't starving, most of them were. They no longer held back and picked up their knives and forks to cut the meat and taste it. Since it's a cooking method invented by Aurora, it shouldn't be bad, right? Dake thought. He picked up his knife and fork and speared a large piece of meat on the plate in front of him. He cut off a small piece, dipped it in sauce, and carefully put it into his mouth before chewing it carefully. This texture is somewhat similar to beef. The taste is passable. The main thing is this sauce. It's really good. While he was chewing and swallowing, Professor Cheong-si had already eaten half of the plate. Speaking of which, there were 3 hybrid giants at the table. Professor Cheong-si and City Lord Montefiore, just by looking at their broad-mindedness, one could tell that they had more than meets the eye. Aurora usually didn't reveal her talents, but Dake had been with her for so long, so he naturally knew that she was the invisible king of gluttons. The chefs of the City Lord's mansion were obviously prepared. All kinds of magical beast meat were served on the table one after another, and the empty plates were quickly taken away with great efficiency. A quarter of an hour later, the speed at which the food was being served slowed down. Dake took a sip of lemon tea to get rid of the greasy taste in his mouth, and then asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Aunt Montefiore, did you find out what kind of demon it is?" Montefiore temporarily put down her knife and fork, picked up a napkin to wipe the corners of her mouth, and then slowly said, "At present, there are at least 3 kinds." 3 kinds? Dake was a little surprised. City Lord Montefiore glanced at Aurora beside him and said, "One kind is the illusion demon, which is good at mental magic. It can use illusions to imitate the appearance, but its essence hasn't changed. As long as one's mental power is higher than it, they can see through it. The other kind is the Amilo worm, which is an insect-type demon that likes to burrow into the bodies of living things, nibbling away at them from the inside out, leaving only the skin behind. The Amilo worm can wear the skin and disguise itself. Because it nibbles away from the inside out, it can even imitate the aura. However, under the skin is still an insect body, and one only needs to open a hole in the skin to see through it. The third kind is the shape-shifting demon, which is the hardest to see through among the three kinds of demons. It's a physical transformation, and no abnormality can be seen from the flesh and skin. It can only be detected through the difference in words and actions, which is very difficult. Illusion demon, Amilo worm, shape-shifting demon. Professor Shi Erfu was silent for a while, then said, "During the war, these three kinds of demons should have been the main targets of attack, and should have been extinct. The weakness of the shape-shifting demon is that after transforming, they can't use their abilities for the time being. The illusion demon's illusions don't match the outline of the body, and it can pass through the illusion when it moves vigorously. The Amilo worm is afraid of salt, and they can't eat food with too much salt. However, these three kinds of demons can't obtain the brain's memories, and their words and actions often reveal flaws. Are there any others?" Professor Shi Erfu is still somewhat reliable, Dake couldn't help but think. City Lord Montefali said in a low voice, "Yes. However, the number discovered so far is extremely small." Dake frowned slightly. Her tone was different from before, and when City Lord Montefali said this, she clearly lacked confidence. His heart skipped a beat, and he said hesitantly, "Brain-eating demon?" City Lord Montefali couldn't help but look at him in surprise, and said, "I found one." The so-called brain-eating demon, as the name implied, was a demon that was born to eat brains. They ate brains, hollowed out the skull, and lived in the brain. They could obtain the brain's memories and imitate the original body flawlessly. Compared to them, the brain liquid demon, which was a parasitic type, was simply an obedient child among the parasitic demons. There was only one way to find a brain-eating demon, and that was to see through them. You could see through the skull and examine the brain tissue to find a brain-eating demon. It sounded simple, but there were very few people with the ability to see through things. Moreover, the brain-eating demon would occupy the brain after eating it, and normal vision wouldn't be able to see through it. Under these circumstances, City Lord Montefali's so-called one was probably only one. There were many that hadn't been found. There were demons hiding inside, and there were demon hordes outside. The current Freedom City was truly like a furnace. If the residents of the city didn't know the details, they could still maintain order. However, once they knew that there might be a brain-eating demon hiding in the crowd, it would definitely cause a large-scale panic. In order to hide the truth, the Freedom City couldn't even completely seal the city. Until now, they had only sealed the East Gate, and only set up checkpoints at the South, West, and North Gates. However, just relying on those checkpoints, they wouldn't be able to find anything. These days, the higher-ups in the city who knew the details were all under heavy pressure. Every day, they felt like they were walking in a quagmire, unable to move forward at all. Of course, we aren't just sitting around and waiting for death. Ever since we discovered that the demons had infiltrated the city, we've already begun to secretly search for capable people. Some time ago, we even found a mage who grasped the ability to see through things. That brain liquid demon was discovered with her help. City Lord Montefali spoke slowly. However, the power of one person is limited. If we only rely on that mage, we won't be able to investigate everyone in the city. Moreover, we are the Freedom City. Since the Freedom City had the name of freedom, the people who came after hearing the news naturally didn't like being restricted by others. The Freedom City was built on this, so they naturally had to bear the consequences of this. The Freedom City now had crooks mixed in with the honest folk. There were many people with criminal records, so they probably wouldn't obediently accept the investigation. It was impossible to gather everyone and investigate them one by one like what Dake and Professor Kazair had done in the academy. Dake couldn't help but ask, "Since these demons are so troublesome, how did you prevent them during the war and catch them?" City Lord Montefali said, "The ability to mobilize during the war isn't something that can be compared to now. Moreover, at that time we had some experts in dealing with these kinds of crises." As she spoke, she raised her head slightly and looked at Ophelia, saying, "For example, the Blood Tribe could easily discover the illusion demon and a Milo bug hidden in the crowd." Ophelia was drinking tea to rinse her mouth, so she only glanced at her when she was mentioned. City Lord Montefali wasn't from the academy, but as a famous hero back then, the two naturally knew each other. However, City Lord Montefali didn't know what had happened to Ophelia. She only thought that Ophelia had gone missing and died in the incident back then. Now that she suddenly saw Ophelia appear, she only felt pleasantly surprised. As for the curiosity that arose because of this, of course, she wouldn't ask on the spot. In any case, she could ask Aurora after the meeting ended. She continued, "As for the Amilo bug, there's a type of bird people among the beast men who are very sensitive to the smell of the Amilo bug. The Amilo bug, within 100 miles, can't escape their detection. Some of the bird people are born with the ability to see through things. There's also a type of subhuman that doesn't need to see with their eyes. They can rely on their mental senses to construct a visual model in their minds and can easily discover brain-eating monsters. However, it's no longer the time of war. The 100 Races Alliance has entered the latter half of the war and only has the treaty of not attacking each other. We've already tried our best to find hybrids with that part of the Beast-Man bloodline. There's some success now, but it's still not enough." In short, the Freedom City had indeed taken many measures internally. If they could get through this most difficult period, there would be a time when they could eliminate dangers and find stability in the future. However, it was precisely this period that was the most difficult to endure. Speaking of which, just the day before yesterday, Montefali was still secretly rejoicing that she had sent Aurora away in time. She didn't expect that Aurora would return in just a few days. Fortunately, she had also brought the professors of the Shang-Malian Academy with her. In this period of rapid development in magical engineering, the professors of the Shang-Malian Academy could always come up with some methods that they didn't have. Professor Shi Erfu said, "In short, we have a general idea of the situation. We will help with this matter. However, we have other important matters to discuss and need time to arrange." Mayor Montefali didn't need to say anything. Professor Shi Erfu had already taken the initiative to take on the responsibility. Mayor Montefali was pleasantly surprised and immediately said, "I've already sent people to organize the information. It will be delivered to you around 1 o'clock. You can stay in the mayor's residence for the time being." "No problem," Professor Shi Erfu said. Montefali looked at the meat on the plate and then glanced at everyone present. She said, "Then, let's continue eating?" This lunch lasted until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The information that Mayor Montefali had sent people to organize was directly delivered to the dining table. Professor Shi Erfu was very straightforward and distributed the information at the dining table. Whether the professors cared or not, they all picked up the information and looked at it. Dake and Aurora were close to each other. They looked at it carefully and communicated with each other. The information recorded in detail the events related to the demons that had happened since June of last year. Naturally, it involved a large number of people and places. Mayor Montefali had Tiger find some people to dispel the doubts of the professors, while Dake directly asked Aurora. Soon, they had a clear understanding of the situation. Generally speaking, what happened in the Freedom Capital was an expanded version of the Brain Liquid Demon incident in the Academy. Relying on Fantasy Beast, Goddess of the Mind's Eye, it was very easy to pick out the demons, including brain-eating demons and shape-shifting demons, from the crowd. In reality, although brain-eating demons were more threatening than brain-liquid demons, they were not as hidden as brain-eating demons. If there was a brain-eating demon standing in front of it, Fantasy Beast, Goddess of the Mind's Eye, could even pick it out with a glance. However, the current situation was not so simple. This was because Dake and the others knew why the demons that should have been extinct had reappeared. Since there were already so many special demons, how could there not be brain liquid demons? There should be, but they haven't been discovered. Dake was almost certain. he discussed with Aurora in a low voice. In the end, he regretfully found that out of the 13 people from the academy, he was the most suitable person to deal with this matter. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, but because of this, his footsteps would be tied down by this city. He thought about it and didn't show his emotions in front of Aurora. Instead, he said, "Don't worry, I'm here." After spending 2 hours to understand the details, they didn't directly make any arrangements in the conference hall. City Lord Montearfali had already left midway, and Tiger Mixed Blood Tiger was left behind. At around 3 o'clock, Dake and the others put away the information and went to the guest room under Tiger's lead to rest for a while. Then at 3:30, they gathered in Professor Shi Erfu's guest room and began the internal meeting. Professor Shi Erfu opened the barrier and said, "Everyone knows the specifics. The current situation seems stable, but according to my observations, the demon's infiltration is actually very serious. It is urgent to deal with this matter. We need to split into 2 groups. One group will stay here to deal with the demons in the city, and the other group will continue to search for number 2. Only by finding number 2 and capturing him can we deal with the root of the problem." "Agreed. I think so too." "Okay." Professor Shi Erfu said, "Very good. Since there are no questions, let's begin the arrangements." Chapter 762. At this point, Professor Shi Erfu suddenly changed the topic and said, "Of course, before that, we need to confirm the location of number 2 first." In fact, they should have confirmed the location of the Demon King as soon as they entered the city, but they didn't have a chance along the way, so they delayed until now. In any case, finding the Demon King and capturing or sealing him was the most important way to solve the problem. They couldn't lose the big picture for the small. Illusion Demon, Amilo Worm, Shapeshifter, Brain Eater. These demons that should have been extinct have reappeared. There is no doubt that this is the doing of the Demon King. If we can't capture the Demon King, these special demons will continue to appear. But this also means that number 2's location should not be far from here. White Gouda braced himself and walked out. He knew that it was time for him to play his role as a human radar. But even if he knew the necessity of doing this, he still couldn't get used to it. After all, no one wanted to see their own body being manipulated like a puppet. First website. https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP. But unlike the previous times, after learning about the crisis facing the Freedom City, he felt a strong sense of responsibility. Thinking about it carefully, maybe it's not bad to be a human radar. At least I'm still useful like this, right? He thought a little bleakly, only to feel that his feet were heavier, definitely not because of the gravity boots. Just like every time, the professors quickly spread out into a circle and surrounded him. Professor Shi Erfu took out the switch, and pressed the red button on the switch. Beep. In the next second, White felt that the heavy burden on his body disappeared, and his whole body became light. His vision changed, and he became like a man in the middle. And his second consciousness, Demon King number 1, once again occupied his body. This time, Mr. Number 1 didn't deceive himself. He suddenly opened his eyes and turned his gaze to the west like lightning. The connection between him and number 2 was unprecedentedly clear. So close. So close. So close. Save me. Save me. Save me. Number 1 roared in his heart and couldn't wait to send out a distress signal. It was very clear that the connection between it and number 2 was bidirectional. When it sensed number 2's existence so clearly, number 2 would also sense its existence so clearly. And as a comrade bearing the same fate, the other party who received the distress signal would definitely come to save him, right? What did you sense? Suddenly, the terrifying half-elf professor's voice drilled into his ears like a shuttle. Number 1's expression suddenly froze, and he calmly stopped asking for help. Then, it shakily turned around and locked eyes with Heart Eye Goddess. Fantasy Beast, Goddess of the Heart's Eye's fringe fluttered, and the third eye between its eyebrows quietly opened. An extremely obscure smile appeared on its face. He had been exposed. It's over. The sudden clear feeling caused number 1 to lose his mind, revealing the hidden purpose of asking for help from his comrades. Of course, this was not a hidden idea. Dake and the others had already predicted this. Even after the goddess of the mind's eye saw through its thoughts, she didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. But number one's heart fell to the bottom because of this. After closing the distance to this extent, the connection between it and number two became extremely clear, and it could sense many things that it couldn't sense before. It knew that number two's strength was stronger than its own. If it wasn't on guard, number two's sudden attack could possibly save it. But it had been exposed. Although it had been exposed long ago. But it thought that it hadn't been exposed. What did you sense? Professor Shi Erfu frowned and asked again. Number one suddenly had the thought of giving up on himself, and for the first time, he actually resisted it. But just as it had this thought, it heard the goddess of the mind's eye say indifferently, "The distance is very close, and they have formed a clear connection between them. Looking at the situation, maybe they can send some fragments of information. But so far, only it has sent out a distress signal unilaterally, and the other party hasn't responded. So, it's impossible to determine whether the message has been successfully sent." Number one's expression froze. But at this time, no one cared about its thoughts. Professor Shi Erfu asked, "Very close. How close is it?" The goddess of the mind's eye glanced at number one and said, "It's not more than half an hour away. If my calculations are correct, it's at the west gate." Professor Shi Erfu suddenly turned around and looked at the west gate. "Aurora, call the castellan here." As she spoke, she pressed the green button on the switch. White's hat turned back to green in the blink of an eye. Number one didn't say a word after the switch of consciousness and was once again locked in the small black room. White Gouda, who had regained control of the body, immediately said, "Professor Amo, number two is much stronger than number one. I can feel the surprise of number one after it formed a clear connection." Professor Shi Erfu quickly nodded, and Aurora had already pushed the door open. Ophelia walked to White's side, and Professor Stephen Harvey's eyes were filled with excitement. Professor Cheong Si's expression was solemn, and Professor Li Li's wings flapped faster. Professor Mitya Bartholomew held her chest and said, "We've alerted the enemy." Professor Shi Erfu narrowed his eyes and said, "We need to act as soon as possible, it's likely to escape." The goddess of the mind's eye, "Do you have number three?" The goddess of the mind's eye said in a very calm tone, "There's only one line of sensing." "That's good news." Professor Shi Erfu's lips curled up slightly, revealing a slight smile. Professor Cheong Si asked, "Shall we begin?" Professor Shi Erfu nodded and said, "Let's end this quickly." Professor Cheong Si asked, "Decapitation strategy?" Professor Shi Erfu nodded and said, "If it's possible." Then she turned around and quickly said, "The situation has changed, let's split into groups first. Ophelia, White, and Callian will be in one group. Don't let him get close to number two. Number two may send demons over. Ophelia, remember to protect your child. If necessary, send me a message through the wind sprite to guide the way. Dake, Olga, Angra, and Eve will be in one group. Find and deal with the demons that infiltrated the management as soon as possible. Pawa, Li, Professor Harvey, and I will be in one group. Find and seal number two. Mitya, take Aurora with you. You'll be in charge of central control and control the overall situation. Is there a problem?" "No problem." Seconded. "That's all for now. Okay, let's wait for the city lord to come." At this moment, Professor Shi Erfu appeared to be extremely reliable. While waiting for the city lord to come, everyone adjusted the status of the magic cards while quickly exchanging their opinions. Basically, the discussion revolved around the two questions: why did number two appear at the city gate? And, after receiving number one's distress signal, what would number two do? There were many reasons for the former, but there were probably two main reasons. First, number two sensed number one's presence and came to investigate. Second, number two had a plan to do something to the City of Freedom. The first and second reasons did not conflict. Number 2 was not locked in a small dark room like Number 1. It could sense Number 1's presence at all times. Currently, it was uncertain whether Number 2 could still sense Number 1 after it was locked in the small dark room. In short, Number 2's perception of Number 1 was definitely closer. After Number 2 sensed Number 1's approach, it would definitely take action. This would even accelerate its plan to attack the City of Freedom. As for what it wanted to do to the City of Freedom, it was not that hard to guess. It was nothing more than a show of substituting one for another. Using special demons such as phantoms, amulos, shapeshifters, brain-eating demons, and so on to completely replace the management of the City of Freedom, they would be able to occupy this isolated human city in the demon territory. If Number 2 was indeed the Demon King and had complete memories, it was very likely that it would do this. However, the City of Freedom's power might be stronger than many people imagined. Number 2's plan would eventually be leaked, but this could also be a catalyst for Number 2 to speed up its actions. As for the question of, what would Number 2 do after receiving Number 1's distress signal? Putting himself in Number 2's shoes, Number 2 did not know what Number 1 was. It had a cognitive barrier. Number 2 had complete memories and knew it was the Demon King. Because of this, it could not be like no one and vaguely imagine that the other party was a comrade. After sensing the exact same aura from Number 1, Number 2 was more likely to have doubts instead of thinking that there was another Number 1. Therefore, Number 1's rapid approach might even make it panic. But it was the Demon King after all and would not run away at the mere sight of it. Even if it was defeated, it should still have the spirit of a Demon King. Therefore, it was most likely to be fully prepared to welcome Number 1's arrival. Regardless of whether the arrival of Number 1 was good or bad, it would try to make contact with it to ensure that it obtained the most basic understanding. All of this was likely to change after Number 1 sent out a distress signal to him. Spirit could not be eaten. The Demon King was the defeated one after all, and the current environment was very different from the past. If it wanted to regroup and revive the demon race, it needed to endure. And once it realized that it was at a disadvantage, it would involuntarily become suspicious. It would guess whether Number 1's distress signal was a bait. Even if it wasn't. If an individual with a similar aura to it was asking for help, it would first think that the individual had been caught and that the person who caught the individual was preparing to catch it as well. Did such a powerhouse exist? Perhaps not in the past, but it was hard to say now. Therefore, it would run. The immortal Demon King would not be ashamed of running away. It called it a tactical retreat. However, things returned to the first point. Number 2 had already invested a lot of resources in the Freedom City. If it chose to run, it would have to give up what it had gained in the past 6 months. In a situation where it didn't even know who the other party was, it would have to completely abandon this long-term plan. Very few people could do it. It will think that at least it has to see clearly who the other party is. Of course, it won't take the initiative to find us. It will send its subordinates to test us. And as long as it doesn't choose to run away immediately, we will have a chance to catch it. Be quick. Execute it before it mobilizes its forces and causes large-scale damage to the outside world. The sound of footsteps approached quickly, and Dake and the others paused their discussion. Aurora pushed the door open and entered with City Lord Montefiore. City Lord Montefiore asked directly, "What happened?" The group looked at each other, and Professor Shi-Erfu said, "Outside the West Gate, there is the leader of this group of demon race remnants. Be careful." City Lord Montefiore's expression changed. "What do you mean?" "If you don't want to go shopping in the city," Professor Shi-Erfu said. "The group of demon race remnants that are infiltrating the management of the Freedom City are about to take action." However, as soon as she waved her hand, everyone stood up. City Lord Montefiore's heart skipped a beat. She quickly suppressed the doubts in her heart and asked, "What should I do?" Professor Shi-Erfu walked to the door and said, "There are 2 points. First, send a message to investigate the West Gate and pay attention to the movements of demon beasts. Second, gather the management and eliminate the bugs." City Lord Montefiore suddenly frowned. "Can you do that?" Dake looked up and said, "Aunt Montefiore, I'll do it. City Mistress Montefiore gave him a deep look and immediately turned to Aurora for confirmation. Aurora nodded vigorously. City Lord Montefiore said decisively, "Okay, I'll call for an emergency meeting right away." "Where is it?" Dake glanced at the west and said, "Let's go to the west gate. We'll start with the frontline management and work our way up." "No problem," City Lord Montefiore said. "There's a meeting place in the west gate. It's very close to the city gate. Do we need to send a warning to the whole city?" Dake said, "After eliminating the bugs. We'll try to avoid large-scale conflicts as much as possible." Professor Shi-Erfu said, "Me, Pawa, Li, and Professor Harvey will go first. We need to take 4 wyverns with us." Dake nodded and said, "Then we'll leave the last one to Professor Mitya." Professor Mitya shook her head and said, "You guys take the backup. I have a vehicle. Also, Ophelia and White will be with me. Shield your aura. Carl Yen will be in the same group as Dake." Sister Carl Yen nodded and said, "No problem." The group chatted and left the room in the blink of an eye. They quickly walked along the corridor. When they got out of the corridor, the 13 of them immediately separated. Professor Shi-Erfu's group of 4 went to the square to ride the wyverns. Professor Mitya took off her hat and blew. The pumpkin carriage pulled by the black beast flew out of the hat. After landing, it expanded with the wind. "Aurora, come with me. We need your identity," Professor Mitya said with a smile. "Okay." Aurora nodded and followed without hesitation. "Aurora, come with me. We need your identity," Professor Mitya said with a smile. Chapter 763. So, they split up into 3 groups. Professor Shi-Erfu and the other 3 took off on the flying dragons. After taking off, they hid themselves and landed silently on the west gate half an hour later. Since they couldn't tell who had been replaced by the demons, they chose to act secretly and didn't even inform the city guard of the west gate. After landing, Professor Shi-Erfu took out a magic card and silently summoned, "In the name of Sarah Shi-Erfu, I summon the Realm of Wind." Originally, it would take a long time to prepare before it could be cast. But now, with this Wind Precinct venue card as the center, it was suddenly released. At that moment, a fierce wind suddenly blew between heaven and earth. After spreading to a certain range, it suddenly swirled. Both the sound of the wind and the aura were wrapped in a floating ball, not leaking out at all. The 4 professors floated in the air and looked out of the city. The west gate was half open, and there were still people coming and going. Looking at the busy adventurer teams, Professor Shi-Erfu couldn't help but sigh. If we can stabilize for a few more years, the City of Freedom will be very prosperous. Professor Cheong-si crossed his arms and stood at the front, his back like a mountain. If we don't handle today's matter well, it will be a catastrophe. Professor Shi-Erfu nodded and said, "Protect me. I need to listen to the sound of the wind." The other 3 nodded, but they didn't cast any spells or summon any magic cards. Remember, https://m Vipkanchu. VIP, too strong a flow of magic power would disturb the sound of the wind. Now, they only needed to accumulate power. Professor Shi-Erfu stood in the middle of the team, crossed his fingers, lowered his head slightly, closed his eyes, and prayed like a young girl. After a while, pure wind elements quietly gathered, and a wind spirit jumped out of the air, flapping its wings and dancing in circles in front of her. A gust of natural wind without any magic power quietly blew out of the realm of wind and out of the city. The wisp of wind of nature blended into nature and blew in all directions. Under the guidance of the wind of nature, countless pieces of information were transmitted to the mind of the wind sprite, which then converged into the mind of Professor Shi-Erfu. Soon, Professor Shi-Erfu's mind was filled with countless images of the area several kilometers away from the city. Some inexperienced adventurers were chasing after the slow-moving, iron-bark tree near the west gate. A careful team of adventurers was walking through the dense forest. A giant python that could change its color according to the environment was coiled around the treetops, staring at them with cold eyes. Further away, there were still adventurers with stronger abilities who relied on the teamwork of their teams to fight against the massive magical beasts. There's no sign of number 2. Professor Shi Erfu frowned slightly. The sound of the wind became louder. Instantly, the sounds of flowers, trees, birds, beasts, insects, fish, and countless living and dead creatures gathered. Professor Shi Erfu's magic power surged into his mind, and his thinking speed suddenly accelerated. He quickly analyzed all the information, trying to find the hidden object. On the other side, Professor Midia rode the pumpkin carriage. However, she didn't go to the west side of the city. Instead, she stopped in the center. She flicked her finger, and a magic card appeared in her hand. As her magic power flowed into the card, it immediately activated. Instantly, countless crystal balls drilled out of the card and flew in all directions under her control. These crystal balls gradually became invisible as they flew out of the carriage. Each crystal ball had a vertical pupil in the middle, and it could see any scene within a radius of 1,000 meters. After all the crystal balls were released, Professor Midia controlled the pumpkin carriage to fly toward the government building in the west side of the city. Alphalia sat in the carriage with the red and green buttons in her hand. She was ready to summon number 1 and ask for the specific direction of number 2. Meanwhile, in the Castellan's mansion, Dake and the other 4 also got into the carriage under the protection of Taiga, the commander of the city guards, and headed to the west side of the city. There were flying dragons above their heads. The carriage was quite spacious, and there was enough space for 3 people. However, Dake summoned the other, magical fantasy beast, goddess of the mind's eye. Tiger drove the carriage himself, and the journey was smooth. During this time, more and more city management personnel walked on this road under the orders of the Castellan, and they converged from all directions. The 2 goddesses of the mind's eye lifted their bangs and revealed their horrifying third eyes. They looked left and right respectively. Their gazes penetrated the carriage, and they could see everything inside and outside. Found it. In the 3rd minute of the journey, one of the goddesses of the mind's eye found a person who had been replaced by a demon. The 3rd carriage from the left has the emblem of a bull's head. The goddess of the mind's eye said lightly. Her voice was very soft, but with the help of wind magic, it was clearly transmitted into Tiger's ears. The Tiger Man Mixed Blood immediately picked up a palm-sized stone and quickly whispered to it. 2 minutes later, the carriage suddenly turned and drove off the road. What awaited him were the city guards waiting for him on the small road. No matter how they changed their appearance, they could not hide their thoughts. No matter if they were replaced by Illusion Demon, Amilo Bug, Shapeshifter, or Brain-Eating Demon, none of them could escape the goddesses of the mind's inspection. Unless they also had a second consciousness and hid their demon consciousness behind their thoughts. The 2 goddesses of the mind's eye worked together and used extremely efficient methods to clean up the hidden bugs among the management personnel. In just a quarter of an hour, nearly 10 people had been discovered. Tiger's face did not show any joy at this result. Different from the people who were infected by the Brain Liquid Demon, the people who were replaced by Illusion Demon, Amilo Bug, Shapeshifter, and Brain-Eating Demon were all dead. Every time a person was found, it meant another person had died. And the people who died one by one were all very familiar to him. 2 or 3 of them were even elders who had been around since the founding of the city. He even had a drink with him 2 days ago. However, the world was like this. The dead could not be brought back to life, so he could only grieve. Tiger struggled to maintain his composure on the surface and continued to drive the carriage forward. From the city lord's mansion to the administrative building in the west of the city, it would take about an hour to drive the carriage on the main road. If the carriage slowed down, it would take even longer. At the speed of 10 people in 15 minutes, by the time they arrived at the administrative building, they could probably find half 100 people. In this case, there will be too many people. Dake said aloud. The people who were replaced by the demons are much more than expected. If this continues, it will be too obvious. If we are unlucky and encounter someone that the city guards can't catch, we will be exposed. Change the strategy. Mock them first, don't catch them. He was not asking for advice, but directly giving an order. After Tiger heard this, he immediately sent the order through the communication stone in his hand. The carriages on the main road finally stopped disappearing. The two goddesses of the mind's eye were still generating reports. Sixth from the right, green carriage, lizard insignia. Directly behind, lilac insignia, both of them. Black carriage, lion head insignia, made in the carriage. Brown carriage, banana insignia, carriage owner. Halfway through the journey, Tiger finally couldn't control his expression and became more and more unsightly. Even if he only read the insignia of the carriages in the reports, he could immediately know who the owner of the carriage was and thus distinguish who was tricked. Suddenly, he exerted force on the horsewhip in his hand. The horse immediately let out a neigh and involuntarily pulled the carriage faster. The neigh of the horse instantly woke him up and he hurriedly urged the carriage to slow down. Dake poked his head out of the carriage and frowned. "Uncle Tiger, what happened?" "Nothing," Tiger said in a deep voice. "I just found out that an old friend's brain was eaten by the demons and almost couldn't control my emotions." Dake was silent for a moment. After a long while he said, "Uncle Tiger, although we can't change what has happened, we can try our best to prevent such things from happening in the future. Calm down and don't reveal any flaws." Tiger said, "I know, but I just can't control myself." Dake said, "I have a premonition that what awaits us next will be a great battle." After that, he said no more and returned to the carriage. The more management members were replaced by the demons, the greater the danger. Once these people were gathered together, it would inevitably lead to a great battle. But since they had chosen this method to deal with it, they had to bear the corresponding risks. After returning to the carriage, Dake quickly thought about how to reduce the risks. After a long while he said to Tiger, "First, make a list of people you can trust by elimination, and then issue missions to these people. We have to do our best to separate them." The administrative building in the western part of the city. City Lord Montefiore had arrived at the building first to assume command. She actually knew very well that she didn't have the qualifications to be a commander. The Sun Warriors could be generals, but not commanders. But she was the one who had built the City of Freedom, so she could only sit on the City Lord's seat. Under these circumstances, the reason why she was able to run the City of Freedom to this extent was actually because of the old team that had followed her from the very beginning. But the process of building the City of Freedom wasn't smooth. The magical beasts that covered the demon territory were natural dangers, and the humans who didn't want to see the city were also frequently making moves. Her old team had been constantly depleted over the past 10 years, and half of them had already been sent away. Because of this, every elder that remained held a very important position in her heart. And it was precisely because she cherished them that she became even more sorrowful after hearing about their deaths. As more and more names were reported, the crack in her heart grew bigger and bigger. At a certain moment, she suddenly realized that she had been deceiving herself all this time. It wasn't that she didn't have a solution. If she had asked the Shang Malian Academy and the Duke's residence for help earlier, she would have been able to somewhat limit the damage before the situation developed to this point. But when she discovered that some of the management members had been replaced by demons, the situation was already very serious, so serious that she couldn't face it. So the measures she had taken hadn't been all she could. She was deceiving herself, unwilling to admit that the situation had developed to this extent. If not for the sudden appearance of Dake and the others, she might have continued to suffer for 10 days to half a month. She wasn't qualified to be a city lord. That was what she had always felt. But now was definitely not the time to be sentimental. Susanna Montefiore stood up from her seat, deep memories of the war emerging in her mind. Desperate times. It was time to draw her sword. She took a deep breath, picked up the list of people she could trust, and quickly began to deploy them. Another half an hour passed. Carriages neatly stopped outside the government building in the west of the city. Several hundred people alighted and entered the building. Some of the managers who had been waiting in the building smiled and welcomed them, guiding them in different directions. These people in charge of guiding them were all on the list of people they could trust. And among the people who were guided in the same direction, there were those who could be trusted, and also those who were targeted as demons. But the people waiting in the room cleverly separated them by arranging seats. The emergency meeting that was originally scheduled to be held in a large hall was divided into 5 parts. Each part had a topic written on it, and they were indeed different topics. And most of the people who were guided in were people related to the topic. In addition, during this period of time, the tense atmosphere in the city could be seen with the naked eye. Everyone was well aware of this. This meeting was also an emergency meeting. Once they were involved in an emergency, it was easy to increase the psychological endurance of people. So, although this arrangement still aroused some suspicions, at least there weren't any major problems. Another half an hour passed. Under the forceful summons of the city lord, all the managers who could come were basically present. Dake's group of 5 also entered under Tiger's lead, and changed into disguise. Refresh later. And among the people who were guided in the same direction, there were those who could be trusted, and also those who were targeted as demons. But the people waiting in the room cleverly separated them by arranging seats. The emergency meeting, which was originally scheduled to be held in a large hall, was divided into 5 parts. Each part had a theme written on it. They were indeed different themes, and most of the people who were brought in were related to the theme of the meeting. In addition, during this period of time, the tense atmosphere in the city could be seen with the naked eye. Everyone was well aware of this. This meeting was also an emergency meeting. Once they were involved in an emergency, it was easy to increase the psychological endurance of people. So, although this arrangement still aroused some suspicions, at least there weren't any major problems. This meeting was also an emergency meeting. Once they were involved in an emergency, it was easy to increase the psychological endurance of people. So, although this arrangement still aroused some suspicions, at least there weren't any major problems. This meeting was also an emergency meeting. Once they were involved in an emergency, it was easy to increase the psychological endurance of people. Endurance. Endurance. Chapter 764. Let's start here. A few minutes later, Dake and his men appeared in front of the first meeting room. However, they didn't push the door open. Instead, they hid their presence and stood outside the door. The 2 Heart's-Eye goddesses quietly opened their third eyes. Killing technique. Mind's Eye. The Mind's Eye goddesses' gaze instantly pierced through the walls and landed on the people in the room. There were less than 100 people in this meeting room. Half of them were confirmed as demons by the Mind's Eye goddess on the way here, while the other half were not completely checked yet. However, since these people were already gathered here, they could be identified at a glance. The 2 Mind's Eye goddesses each had a temporary seating chart in their hands. The 2 of them quickly sketched according to their seats, and in just a few minutes, they had basically found the demons hidden among them. The reason why it was basically, and not all, was naturally because before a thorough investigation, they couldn't be sure if the demons used other methods other than illusion demon, amelo-bug, shapeshifter demon, brain-eating demon, and brain liquid demon. However, even if they couldn't be completely sure, they could only do so for now. Remember the URL. Vipkanchu. 6 Dake took the 2 seating charts from the Mind's Eye goddess and compared them with each other. It was only after he found that the markings on the 2 seating charts were the same that he could give one of them to Tiger. Tiger took a look and was greatly shocked. If you have any emotions, vent them after this is over. Dake said calmly and turned to the second meeting room. Continue. When they arrived outside the second meeting room, the Mind's Eye goddess had already received the seating chart for this meeting room. There were more people in the second meeting room than the first, and only a small portion of them were confirmed to be demons. This meant that the workload of the goddess of the Heart's Eye would be even greater. However, in reality, it would only take a few more minutes. Soon, the second meeting room's inspection was also completed. Dake gave one of the seating charts to Tiger and went around the middle hall to the next meeting room, and then the next. There were a total of 4 smaller meeting rooms, and it took nearly 30 minutes for the inspection to be completed. Dark led the crowd to the outside of the auditorium without stopping to rest. On the other hand, the city guards that Tiger had brought with him, who had been tested to be safe, had already surrounded the 4 meeting halls. As long as the order was given, they would rush in and kill the demons. This is the last one. I wonder how Professor Shi Erfu is doing? Dark glanced at the seating chart of the auditorium and passed it to the mind's eye goddess that didn't have sentience. Looking at the seating chart, the number of people in the auditorium was almost the same as the number of people in the 4 conference halls. Although it would be faster to check them all together, it would still take more than 20 minutes if nothing unexpected happened. This round trip took nearly an hour. It was fortunate that the person hosting the meeting and the people attending the meeting were able to persevere. Furthermore, the atmosphere in the auditorium was especially intense. If it weren't for the mind's eye goddess being able to clearly see through them, no one would have thought that the people who were intensely discussing how to solve the crisis of trust caused by the demon's infiltration were actually demons who had infiltrated the meeting. After this round of verification, we'll have to think about how to eliminate them all. Dake tapped his fingers and frowned as he pondered. Among the 5 types of demons that he had discovered, only the brain fluid demon could stimulate the combat power of its host. As for the other 4 types of demons, they didn't have much combat power. Among them, the more troublesome one was the illusion demon that specialized in illusions. As for the Amilo worm and the brain-eating demon, they were just worms that parasitized corpses. They couldn't use the powerful abilities of their original bodies. As for the shape-shifting demon, when they transformed, they couldn't even use their own abilities and were even more fragile. If they were caught off guard and attacked, Tiger's team would be able to eliminate half of them in an extremely short amount of time. After that, the Rat-Man assassins under his command would quickly cast a special spell on those marked as demons based on the names on the seating chart. This would cause a conspicuous wisp of blood energy to appear above their heads. With this wisp of blood energy as a distinguishing factor, those who passed the test could be counted as part of their combat power. Even if those demons didn't care about their identities being exposed and revealed their true bodies, they could still guarantee that their combat power would be overwhelming. The key battle was in the auditorium. Firstly, the auditorium had the most people. Secondly, more than half of the higher-ups of the Freedom City were sitting in the front row of the auditorium. And in a place where hybrids gathered like the Freedom Capital, there had always been a culture of the strong being respected. Therefore, the ratio of powerhouses among the higher-ups was extremely terrifying. If one of these people was infected by the brain fluid demon, it would be extremely troublesome. How many are there? Dake asked in a low voice. Tiger looked down at the seating chart in the Heart's Eye Goddess's hands and said with a gloomy expression, "The first 3 rows are all important targets. There are already 4 marked as brain fluid demons." "Tell me their identities," Dake said. Tiger said with great familiarity, "The one in the middle of the first row is an Owlman hybrid. It has a rare magical talent among the half-beastmen. It's best at large-scale psychic illusions combined with eye techniques. It can pull over 100 people into its environment at once. It's always been called a nightmare." The one on the left of the second row is a rock rhinoceros hybrid. It has monstrous strength and can condense stone into armor. It can charge and break through enemy lines unstoppably. The one on the right of the second row is a flame hawk hybrid. It has the innate ability to control wind and fire. However, its magical talent isn't very high. It can only attach wind and fire to its weapons. Still, it's very difficult to deal with. The one on the right of the third row is a gray elf hybrid. Gray elves are natural-born assassins. They can sneak into shadows and assassinate in stealth. It's also very smart and can use dark magic. I'm afraid it's the most difficult one to deal with here." After hearing this, Dake nodded and said, "I'll remember it." The people infected by the brain fluid demon were the only ones who could be saved. There was still a chance for these 4 higher-ups to be saved. However, once the battle started, any bit of mercy would lead to more variables in the battle. Although Tiger had all kinds of thoughts in his mind, he didn't say anything to plead for mercy for the 4 people. Even if the 4 of them were comrades who had fought side by side with him before. Time passed bit by bit, and the seating chart in the Heart's Eye Goddess's hands was gradually filled with marks. At this time, the sky was turning dark and dusk was coming. It was a somber time. Before the examination in the auditorium was completed, a strange sound suddenly came from the first examination hall. Tiger suddenly picked up the short-distance communication stone in his hand. The messenger's voice suddenly sounded, "Commander, we've been discovered." Tiger frowned and immediately said, "Immediately activate the internal barrier and seal the passage between the first and second conference halls. Annihilate the demons in the first conference hall. Prioritize the shape-shifting demon." Roger that. After a crisp reply, the battle began in advance. Tiger put down the communication stone and was about to speak when suddenly, a sound came from his clothes and a red light shone out. He hurriedly took out another communication stone hidden in his clothes. The front of this communication stone had the word "West" engraved on it. He immediately activated the communication stone and a hurried voice came out. It was the voice of the West City's city guard. The message was concise and to the point. Demonic beasts are attacking the city. Demonic beasts attacking the city, also known as the demonic beast tide, had been a phenomenon since the second year of the Freedom City's construction. And with the passage of time, the frequency of demonic beasts attacking the city increased. Last year, there was a sudden surge in the strength and number of magic beasts, so much so that the Freedom Capital was caught off guard and suffered great losses. They almost couldn't withstand it. After that, the application to establish the Adventurers Guild was approved, and a large number of adventurers poured into the Freedom City. Under the guidance of the Guild's missions, they cleaned up the surrounding demonic beasts again and again. Only then did the intensity of the demonic beast attacks decrease. However, the magical beast tide that had appeared outside the city gates today made people wonder if the previous magical beast tide had decreased in intensity because it was accumulating forces for today's attack. Outside the West City Gate, tens of thousands of demonic beasts gathered into a tide and madly rushed in from 5 kilometers away. Smoke and dust billowed and the earth trembled. Countless adventurers who were exploring outside the western part of the city sensed the anomaly and fled into the city in a panic. The city guards in charge of the city gate nervously watched the adventurers running back and desperately shouted, "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" They were frantically urging the adventurers to quickly return to the city. Once the demonic beast tide approached, they would have no choice but to close the city gate, and those adventurers would be locked out of the city. On the city wall, Professor Shi Erfu's expression was extremely gloomy. Not long ago, she had finally locked onto a demonic encampment amidst the countless sounds of wind. But as soon as her wind feelers reached there, they were cut off in an instant. Then, she immediately sent a message to Professor Midya and asked her for the specific direction of number 2. Professor Midya quickly gave her a more accurate direction, but then she also gave her a not-so-good reminder. "It's almost night. It's almost night." There were many demonic races that could gain strength from the night, and they usually became stronger at night. On the other hand, humans who left early and returned late would feel tired at night. But more importantly, the second consciousness in White's body, the connection between number 1 and number 2, would gradually disappear at night. Once the connection disappeared, the professors would no longer be able to lock onto number 2's position. This terrifying demonic beast tide that was like a tsunami in front of them might just be number 2's expedient to escape. But would number 2 really escape? The world was ever-changing. Speculating based on past experience might be difficult to get the right answer. Dake's heart skipped a beat. He quickly asked, "Demonic beasts attacking the city? The West Gate? Or the North and South?" Tiger said, "It's a message from the West." "Don't worry, I'll send a message to the guards on the other 3 walls to immediately strengthen their defenses in case of a possible sneak attack." Dake glanced at him and said, "Be careful of collusion from the inside and outside." Tiger said, "Almost all the senior management personnel are in this government building." Dake said, "Almost, right? And you should know that the various subordinate organizations in the city are no longer under management." Then, he looked up again and whispered, "I wonder how Professor Shi Erfu and Professor Midya will deal with this?" Meanwhile, from Professor Midya's pumpkin carriage, more than twice the number of crystal balls flew out in large batches. In the blink of an eye, they blended into the coming night and flew out to various places outside the city. She would sit in the city and collect information with these thousands of crystal balls. Then, she would use her magically strengthened brain to analyze and process this information at high speed. Then, Aurora would issue orders on her behalf. During the period when all the city administrators were locked up in the government building, she would take over the entire city. In the process of completing this task, Midya frequently looked at Aurora. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would never have thought that this little girl, who was only 12 years old, would have such a high natural status in this huge city. Those who were full of repulsion towards her voice at first, after hearing Aurora's voice, instantly turned around. The city guards in charge of guarding the west side of the city were even inspired by her few words. The effect was so obvious that it even made Professor Midya wonder who was the real city lord in this city. At this time, the real city lord, Susanna Montefiore, had also learned the news of the demonic beasts attacking the city through the communication stone. She was very anxious in her heart, but she didn't show it. As the saying goes, one must first settle the internal affairs. Since today's internal affairs had already been carried out, they couldn't give up halfway. If they couldn't deal with the matters here in one go, they might not have such an opportunity in the future. I can only temporarily hand over the city's safety to the professors of the Shang Malian Academy. She was anxious in her heart, and a few wisps of flames jumped out between her hair. When will Dake's side be finished? She didn't have to wait too long. Only 3 minutes after receiving the news of the demonic beast tide, Dake Dimming pushed the door open and entered. At this time, the atmosphere in the auditorium was very solemn. Although City Lord Montefiore continued the meeting as if nothing had happened, the high-level administrators also had short-distance communication stones in the city. They knew that more and more people were coming in from the demonic beast tide. The 4 high-level administrators in the front row who were infected by the brain liquid demon became more impulsive because of the stimulation of the brain liquid demon. Among them, the rock rhinoceros and flame eagle hybrids couldn't understand the city lord's thoughts and slammed the table. At that moment, the front door of the auditorium was pushed open, and the blonde youth strode in. Strangely enough, most of the high-level administrators in the Freedom City were familiar with the blonde youth who suddenly appeared. But after all, it was the first time they met, so they needed some time to recall and digest. During this time, Dake Dimming had already quickly stepped onto the stage, and with a bright smile, he bowed to the people below. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Next, we will be able to spend a wonderful night together. I am Dake Dimming, the son of the Valkyrie. Geijai, give me some monthly votes. Chapter 765. It had to be said that using the title of Valkyrie was very cool. When Dake announced that he was the son of the Valkyrie, the atmosphere that had been stirred up by his sudden entrance suddenly disappeared by half. Dake also successfully took over the situation after that. He quickly gave Sister Kalyen a look, and Sister Kalyen lightly tapped on the gourmet card, hidden in her sleeve. 3 seconds later, a magical halo spread outwards as if it was breathing, and in the blink of an eye, it covered the entire auditorium. Some people with sharp senses noticed the magical fluctuations, but before they could react, a pot of black tea appeared on the table, followed by cakes, biscuits, and fruit platters that surrounded the teapot. As a result, a rich aroma filled the room, and the auditorium was filled with a sweet atmosphere. Although the Shang Malian Academy was already used to the magical effects of the gourmet card, when they thought of the surprise of the first-year students attending the academy banquet for the first time, they could guess how the outside world would react. As expected, the people in the auditorium were quickly attracted by the black tea and desserts in front of them, and the atmosphere in the auditorium changed because of this. Dake took the opportunity to look at City Lord more dolefully, and the latter blinked her eyes, understanding tacitly. Immediately after, a seating chart with the person's identity floated in front of her. She picked up the seating chart and quickly looked at it. The website was https://m Vipkanchu. VIP Dake lightly tapped the tip of his foot, and illusory beast, Ibu, Gluttony 2, that was following him received the order, and instantly understood and silently used its ultimate skill, Tea Party. The interval between the gourmet card and Tea Party was not long, and with the gourmet card at the bottom, this time it did not cause much tension. Within the sweet atmosphere in the auditorium, there was suddenly a bit of charm. Tea Party, was in effect. Green vines crawled all over the walls, and bright rose-like flowers bloomed in the air. The fragrance of the flowers permeated the air. All the people who were covered by the tea party couldn't help but feel a strong sense of hunger and thirst. The people who were still watching subconsciously raised their hands, either pouring tea or tasting the cake. This whole place was actually drinking afternoon tea, even though it was already dusk. Just when the people in the auditorium were attracted by the tea party, a group of people quietly entered from the back door. The city guards who had mastered the tracking spell cast it together, and above the heads of the people who were marked as demons, there were obvious wisps of blood mist. Even though this auditorium had the largest number of people, and most of them were extremely powerful, no one was able to react in time. Almost all of the devilish beings had been marked as soon as possible. After that, all that was left was to fill in the gaps. A magic elf card appeared in Dake's hand. In the name of Dake Dim-ing, I summon this spirit illusion bug. He quickly chanted, and in just 3 seconds, a glowing lava flew out of the card, crookedly flying towards the center of the auditorium. This spirit illusion insect's body was very transparent, with a faint sense of transparency. On its back, there was a pair of small transparent wings that were emitting a radiant light. When it flew to the center of the auditorium, it immediately released its core killing technique, Eye of Illusion Breaker. The spirit illusion bug's eyes instantly widened, and a pair of enormous eyes appeared in front of it, suddenly emitting a blazing white light. In the blink of an eye, that light illuminated the people who were enjoying the tea party. The illusion demons, who had transformed into humans, immediately sensed it. However, their hands were still uncontrollably glued to the desserts and teacups. Seeing the illusions on their bodies melt like snow under the light of the Eye of Illusion Breaker, they were affected by the tea party, and couldn't immediately react. The city guards, who were already prepared, rushed in a single file and charged at the demons who had revealed their true forms. Illusion demons were a special type of demon that specialized in illusions. They had ugly faces and weak bodies. Once their illusions were broken, they could only wait to be slaughtered. Because of this, illusion demons were usually in a protected position in the army. It had always been rare to see an illusion demon exposed in front of a crowd like this. However, the remnants of the demon race had very little resources. Even if number 2 was the demon king with complete memories, he couldn't make bricks without straw. There weren't many demons that could be born. They planned against the Freedom Capital because they wanted to take over this city and increase the number of resources they could obtain. Due to the urgency of the situation, even the physically weak illusion demons had to go into battle. Of course, if it wasn't for this emergency meeting, these illusion demons would have had 1 or 2 demons that sneaked into the city. However, since they wanted to act, they had to obey the city lord's orders. Today, they had to abandon the demons and enter the government building alone. The city guards who rushed into the crowd didn't hesitate to kill the illusion demons as soon as they saw them. They didn't want to let them find any gaps to release their illusions. Among the illusion demons, amelo worms, shape-shifting demons, brain-eating demons, and brain-liquid demons, the illusion demons were the most vulnerable but also the most difficult to deal with. Therefore, killing the illusion demons first was the most appropriate choice. The hatred between humans and demons was as deep as the ocean. Even the hybrids were no exception. When the city guards saw the illusion demons that were exposed, their eyes turned red. They used all their strength, and in just 2 to 3 minutes, they killed all the illusion demons in the field as if they were cutting chives. The scene suddenly became quiet. Within these 2 to 3 minutes, Doc had already summoned Trash Slime, and used Greed 3 to evolve it into Greed 2. Then, he cast Divide and Succeed on the spot and split it into a total of 7 slimes. Then, he used 3 of the slimes and the main body of Greed 2 as a sacrifice to summon a 3rd-tier magical elf, Baluto Duolong. At the same time, Eve used Shadow Hiding to sneak into his shadow. Olga and Engra stood on his left and right like 2 door guards protecting him. To the maids, protecting the young master's safety was their number 1 responsibility. Helping the Freedom City to kill demons wasn't part of their mission. Dragon Baluto, aim your dragon arrows. After the illusion demons were all killed, the effect of Tea Party gradually weakened. More city guards rushed in from the back door and pounced on the demons with bloody auras floating above their heads. The mayor of the Freedom City, Suna Montefiore, at this time, stomped her feet and rushed into the crowd like a rocket. Her target was the owl-human hybrid that was parasitized by the brain liquid demon, Loluo Mitch. Loluo Mitch sat in the first row. Her face was old and full of wrinkles, her eye sockets were very deep, and there were some feathers around her shoulders. But other than that, there wasn't much similarity between her appearance and the owl-humans. While anger appeared in the eyes of City Lord Montefiore, she also rejoiced. Loluo Mitch had known her for more than 20 years. They were comrades in arms during the war. Loluo Mitch's illusion was very powerful. She had helped their team carry out many infiltration missions and also helped them escape from death many times. The trauma of the war and the ruthlessness of time caused Loluo Mitch's physical strength to gradually weaken. In recent years, she had the idea of retiring behind the scenes. However, Lord Montefiore was dependent on her and didn't want her to retire. However, this willfulness caused her to attract disaster and become the target of the demon race. Fortunately, the parasite in her brain was the brain liquid demon. Don't let her release the illusion. The eyes of City Lord Montefiore were indeed burning with crimson flames. The bloodline of the sun-chasing giant was boiling in her body, making her eyes as hot as the sun, releasing a strong flame. Lualumik was the first to break free from the Tea Party's control. She suddenly screamed, and a vortex-like pattern appeared in her eyes. She released a spiral wave at City Mistress Montefiore. However, City Lord Montefiore was prepared for this. The power of the sun surged and shattered her pupil technique. Bang! At the moment when the eye technique was broken, the mayor's right hand had already grabbed Loluo Mitch's neck. Quick! City Lord Montefiore suddenly raised it up high, but her mouth anxiously called out. On the other side, Sister Kalien had already condensed light on her fingertips. She pointed forward, and the light of magic passed through space and pointed at Loluo Mitch's forehead. In an instant, it penetrated Loluo Mitch's brain and the parasitic, brain liquid demon. Loluo Mitch's eyes rolled back, and she suddenly lost consciousness. The mayor's right hand exerted force and suddenly threw her behind. Anger took half a step forward, reached out, and grabbed Loluo Mitch's body, then placed her beside him. The next second, the mayor had already rushed to the rock rhinoceros hybrid in the second row. The battle broke out. The dragon arrow of the multi-dragon Baluto shuttled through the air, aiming at the people whose brains were hollowed out by the brain-eating monster. The brain-eating monster's body was not strong, and it could not resist the power of the dragon arrow. Every dragon arrow shot out accurately took away a brain-eating monster. The efficiency was extremely high. Dake did not continue to summon. Instead, he stood on the stage and observed the situation. He narrowed his eyes slightly, watching the demons who realized that they had been exposed violently attacking people. He watched the people who knew that their mocked colleagues had been replaced by demons from the shouts of the city guards. He watched the shape-shifting monstrous original body that looked like a large slime after its transformation was removed. He watched the battle between the mayors Montefiore and the rock rhinoceros hybrid enter a stalemate. He watched the other two hybrids that were parasitized by the brain liquid demon rushing over. Good. Dake's eyes lit up, and he did not retreat half a step. The reason he stood there was to make himself stand out enough. In this entire auditorium, the most threatening ones were the four hybrids that were parasitized by the brain liquid demon. The owl hybrid was the most dangerous, but it was also the easiest to deal with. Now, it had fainted and was captured. The rock rhinoceros hybrid was the most powerful and had the strongest defense. After activating its ability, it could transform into a 4 to 5 meter tall giant. It could cause damage to people around it with a wave of its hand. Even the Sun Warriors could not take it down in a short period of time. In fact, most of the elders that followed the mayors Montefiore to build the City of Freedom were heroes who had been active in the war. The hybrid bloodline made it difficult for them to obtain the glory they deserved, but their achievements would not be forgotten. They were all the strongest of the strong. Once these 4 hybrids that were parasitized by the brain liquid demon joined the battle at the rear, even if the management of the City of Freedom were all soldiers, they would still suffer a lot of losses. Now that the remaining 2 hybrids were successfully attracted by him, it was the best result. A flame eagle hybrid and a gray elf hybrid? Dake was slightly excited. Sister Kalyen, which one do you want? Sister Kalyen smiled charmingly and waved her hand to point at the gray elf hybrid that was emitting a dark aura. Light and darkness countered each other. She was a former nun of the saint, so it was naturally easy for her to deal with this kind of gray elf hybrid. Then I'll... Dake looked excitedly at the flame eagle hybrid that was covered in flames and took out 3 magic cards from his card bag. Angra, end this quickly, Olga, who was standing beside him, said ruthlessly. Dake's expression froze and saw that Angra had already stepped out from the other side. As a qualified maid, of course, she would not put her master in danger. Angra raised her head slightly, her doll-like oval face reflecting the blazing fire. Her eyes were very big, and her reddish-brown hair was woven into an extremely complicated hairstyle. Her appearance revealed the unique charm of the Palace of Pisces. But that was only her appearance. Angra was an exception in the Palace of Pisces. Dress. After a low chant, a ring made of water droplets gathered around Angra's body. After completely digesting the 7 underworld flames, the terrifying magic power that she obtained exploded in an instant. A water-blue fish shadow appeared behind her, and a water-type armament that was engraved with exquisite diamond-shaped patterns clung tightly to her slender body. The moment she put on her long boots, Angra's figure turned into a phantom. After being stimulated by the brain liquid demon, the flame eagle hybrid with a ferocious face suddenly flew backward. Its back slammed into the ceiling and smashed the magic lamp into pieces. Angra's figure appeared for a moment and then disappeared again. Fist marks appeared on the flame eagle hybrid's body, and flames were splashing all over its body. The flame eagle hybrid screamed incessantly, and it did not seem to have any strength to fight back. Chirp. After being ravaged for half a minute, the flame eagle hybrid finally let out an ear-piercing scream, and a resistance ring of wind and fire burst out from its body, finally forcing Angra to retreat slightly. Its eyes were red, and it suddenly grabbed the wind and fire weapon in its hand. But before it could make a move, a giant python made of water elements swam out from the whirlpool behind Angra and opened its giant mouth at it. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 766. Roar. The roar resounded through the hall. The flame hawk hybrid was swallowed by the anaconda. The flames burning all over its body struggled in the water and showed signs of extinguishing. This kind of attribute restriction was extremely fatal. Moreover, the magic power in Angri's body was now enormous. She was already one of the top maids in the Duke's mansion. When she returned from this mission, she would even be qualified to enter the Gold Temple and undergo the Gold Trial to try to gain the recognition of the remaining Gold Holy Suits. Angri stepped on the water cloud and hovered in the air. Water swirled and condensed on her slender arms, forming gauntlets that were several times thicker than her arms. Her figure exploded again in the blink of an eye. That punch actually penetrated the anaconda's body and sent the flame hawk hybrid flying out of the anaconda's stomach. Pfft! An extremely long line of blood suddenly appeared in the air. The flame eagle hybrid spat out a mouthful of blood from the impact of the punch. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6-inch Newman. City Lord Montierfali, who was fighting with the rock rhinoceros hybrid, was suddenly distracted and exclaimed. Then, she was sent flying by the huge fist covered in rocks. That rock rhinoceros hybrid found an opportunity and roared, charging forward. This aura was much stronger than that of the flame eagle hybrid. At this moment, a white light suddenly fell from the sky and fell into the body of the flame hawk hybrid Newman. That flame hawk hybrid was finally healed and could breathe a sigh of relief. However, Angri's petite body that was fully armed had already attacked again. Hold back. It was actually Dake, who saw Angri's fighting ability for the first time, and he hurriedly reminded her. The adorable beast standing at his feet was blinking its eyes. Dake had originally summoned it to heal people who were in danger. He didn't expect that the first person to benefit would be the Flame Hawk hybrid Newman, who was parasitized by the brain fluid demon. He was speechless and continued to look at Angry. After receiving the young master's reminder, Angry suddenly slowed down her attacks. That water elemental anaconda actually turned into a stream of water and retreated into the whirlpool behind her. Then, from the vortex, another 8 octopus tentacles drilled out, making her look like a tentacle monster. Her appearance was horrifying. In the next moment, the 8 water elemental tentacles suddenly extended and wrapped around the Flame Hawk hybrid. Wind. The Flame Eagle hybrid yelled as it flew backward. The feathers on its wings stood up and turned into arrows of wind and fire. They shot toward Angry. However, Engra merely narrowed her eyes and rushed into the midst of the arrows without any defense. The arrows hit her armor, but only produced a series of ding-ding-dong-dong sounds, not even leaving a mark. The Flame Eagle hybrid's eyes turned red. Brain fluid demon would stimulate the desire of the host, and the Flame Hawk hybrid was completely dominated by the desire to win. The fact that it couldn't even break through the opponent's defense made it extremely uncomfortable. However, the passage of time was so terrifying. The era that belonged to him had come to an end. Seeing that there was no more suspense, Dake's gaze finally turned to Sister Kalyen. Sister Kalyen didn't reveal much in the academy. If she hadn't participated in several incidents, Dake's understanding of her would have been limited to her being a great nun who was expelled by the Holy Church. In short, whether she was already so strong when she was a nun in the Holy Church or became so after becoming a school doctor, it didn't make any difference to the current situation. Sister Kalyen didn't rush up to whip the Grey Elf. Instead, she used the standard strategy of a magus. She first summoned her magic elf. Dake had seen Sister Kalyen's magic elf before. When she was too busy in the infirmary, she would occasionally summon a few magic elves to help. When necessary, she would also summon magic elves to perform emergency treatment for students. Dake occasionally heard some medical lessons from Luo C. He knew that most healing spells would overdraw the life force of the person being healed to a certain extent. Superficial effects could be made up for by eating, taking medicine, and recuperating. However, if the overdraw was too severe, it would lead to a permanent loss of life force, resulting in consequences such as a reduction in lifespan. Therefore, although the doctors in this world also needed to learn healing spells, they wouldn't use them if they could. On the other hand, the magic elves didn't need to worry about overdrawing their life force. Sister Kalyen first summoned a magic elf of the first tier to stop the Grey Elf hybrid. Then, she used it as a sacrifice to summon a magic elf of the second tier to continue dealing with it. Then, she used a sacrificial summoning spell to summon a magic elf of the third tier in a very ordinary way. It was an 8-star light elemental angel type. When he saw the angel type, a question that Dake had given up on thinking about couldn't help but surge into his mind. What kind of commandment did Sister Kalyen violate to be expelled from the Holy Church? A great nun who had cultivated into an angel type. The angel type that was floating at a low altitude with its toes touching the ground had a creamy jelly-like appearance. However, it was a full 2 meters tall. Its eyes and mouth were on the front of the jelly-like body. Its hands and feet were extremely slender, like a young girl whose entire body was hidden in the jelly-like body. On top of its head, like most angels, there was a white halo floating. On its back, there were 2 small chicken wings floating. It was very cute. If it wasn't for the Grey Elf hybrid that was being punched by it, it would really be cute. Dake blinked his eyes. After a long while, he finally realized what it was. The halo on top of the angel type's head was constantly releasing white light. The white light could disperse the shadows, making it impossible for the Grey Elf hybrid to sneak into the shadows. Once the white light shone on the Grey Elf hybrid, it would be nearly half a second sluggish, as if a frame number was suddenly pulled out. The angel type's fist would be swung out at that moment, making it impossible to dodge. Although the angel type's fist was small, it was wrapped in a layer of light elemental energy. Every punch that landed on the Grey Elf hybrid's body was like a critical hit. This gray elf hybrid would occasionally stubbornly display its ability, wanting to turn the situation around. However, every time there was a sign, it would be beaten down by the angel type. In this way, it was almost a one-sided crushing situation. In this situation, Sister Kalien was already accumulating magic power for the next magic card that could make people faint. Once the gray elf's magic power and physical strength dropped to a certain level, she would immediately launch an attack and completely capture it. From the looks of it, it's the City Lord's side that is in trouble? Dake's gaze turned and looked at City Lord Montefiore. At this moment, a clear line had appeared between the demons and humans in the auditorium. Those with lower battle prowess wisely retreated upon hearing Tiger's order, while those with higher battle prowess unhesitatingly charged at the demons after they revealed their true forms. In this unforeseen situation, the humans had a clear advantage. The battle between City Lord Montefiore and the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid was almost the final variable. That Rock Rhinoceros hybrid was called Gardner. Like Tiger, he was an elder that had existed since the founding of the city. Moreover, his prestige in the Freedom City was even higher than Tiger's. He was now the general of the Freedom City. Although the Freedom City was a large city in terms of land area, there were only 2 armies in the city. They were named Sun and Moon. Gardner was the highest-ranking officer of the Flaming Sun Army. Incidentally, the general of the other Ice Moon Army was the Owl hybrid, Lualumik. As for the Grey Elf hybrid, he was the deputy commander of the Ice Moon Army. If nothing unexpected happened, when Lualumik retired, the Grey Elf hybrid would take over the position of general of the Flaming Sun Army. Apart from the 2 armies, the only army left in the Freedom City was the City Guard led by Tiger. In other words, the demons had already controlled half of the Freedom City's defenses. If not for today's meeting, the Freedom City would have suffered great losses. Gardner's skin was thick and his strength was immense. His surroundings had already been swept clean. City Lord Montefiore also had a giant bloodline. Even if she was hit head-on, she was completely fine. Just now, she was sent flying by a punch because she was distracted for a moment. However, after crashing through the wall, she immediately stood up and forcibly blocked the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid's next attack. She looked around and saw that Angry and Sister Kalien had taken control of the battle. She finally relaxed and threw herself into the battle with the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid. She didn't completely activate the sun-chasing giant bloodline. She still maintained her normal form. In order to not burn Gardner, she even restrained her flames and didn't use her powers as an elven envoy. She only relied on her physical strength to exchange blows with the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid. Every time their fists collided, there would be a loud bang and the spreading ripples would shatter everything around them. However, in this battle where every punch met flesh, she vaguely felt a trace of carefreeness that she hadn't felt in many years. This is how it should be, this is how it should be. City Lord Montefiore roared in her heart, and the power of each of her punches and kicks rose steadily as her fists and kicks collided. She was a natural warrior. She was born for battle. Calming down to build the city and worrying about the city's construction day and night was not in her nature. Gardner! She suddenly roared. This time, her punch actually knocked back the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid covered in rock armor. The Rock Rhinoceros hybrid that was like a heavy tank actually gradually fell into a disadvantage in terms of pure strength. City Lord Montefiore temporarily threw the heavy responsibility of being a city lord to the back of her mind. She slowly regained the feeling of being a warrior. When she punched again, her entire body was connected. With one punch, all her meridians were connected. A large force formed above her head as if she was possessed by a giant. This punch actually caused cracks to appear on the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid's rock armor. Boom! The Rock Rhinoceros hybrid's huge body left the ground and didn't land again after that. City Lord Montefiore chased after it and used 24 airborne combo on it. Finally, she shattered the rock armor all over its body. When Gardner's huge body fell from the sky, she stepped on its abdomen where she had fought in the past. She had the urge to raise her head and howl. At this moment, a white light suddenly shot over and shot into the Rock Rhinoceros hybrid's forehead. The Rock Rhinoceros hybrid that was struggling and howling suddenly lost consciousness. Its body suddenly stiffened and fell down. City Lord Montefiore turned her head abruptly and saw Sister Carlien gently nodding at her. The flames in her eyes subsided, and the hot blood in her brain also quickly faded. She regained the calmness that a city lord should have. Among the remaining 3 high-level managers that were parasitized by the brain liquid demon, the flame eagle hybrid Newman had already become a drowned rat. He was tied up like a dumpling by 8 water elemental tentacles. The gray elf hybrid was lying next to the owl hybrid Loromacai. It was obvious that it had also been affected by a fainting spell like the rock rhinoceros hybrid. Sister Carlien's original spell was aimed at the brain liquid demon in the brains of the parasites. After the light of the spell shot in, the brain liquid demon died on the spot. The parasites' brains were thus stimulated and they lost consciousness. As these 3 strongest forces were successively subdued, the battle in the government building completely came to an end. The remaining waves of small-scale battles no longer affected the situation. Tiger, I'll leave this to you. City Lord Montefiore took a deep breath. After regaining her calmness, the first thing she thought of was the demonic beast Tide. She wanted to lead the army to battle, but the commanders of the 2 legions were still lying there. She didn't know how many people outside were still disguised by the demons. The current Freedom City was still in a precarious situation. It was in a precarious situation where the city could be destroyed at any time. No matter what, she had to go out. Let's go to the West City Gate. Dake walked down from the stage and came to City Lord Montefiore's side. Although his body had developed quite quickly, he was still like a child beside City Lord Montefiore. Will Aurora also grow to this height? He couldn't help but have this thought in his mind. Then, he immediately extinguished it. Although Professor Shi Erfu and the others were guarding the West City Gate, the professors didn't have the most direct way to see through the demon's disguise. When the war was intense, there was a possibility that they would be stabbed in the back. Therefore, he had to go. I'll leave a mind's eye goddess here to keep the mind's eye open and cooperate with your inspection. He had the mind's eye goddess, which didn't have intelligence, temporarily follow Tiger while he walked out of the door under the protection of the 3 maids. Aunt Montefiore were needed outside. However, the process of leaving the government building wasn't as smooth as expected. The barrier blocked part of their perception. They were focused on the battle and didn't notice that the government building had been surrounded by demons who had sneaked into the city. These demons didn't have any disguise techniques, but most of them were in human form. After covering up the parts that were different from humans, they could easily sneak into the city. The Freedom City didn't have any restrictions in the first place, and demi-humans frequently came in and out. Naturally, there were no restrictions on the demons in human form. This group of demons was large in number, and their strength was clearly higher than illusion demons, amelobugs, brain-eating demons, and shape-shifting demons. They were supposed to be deployed by those who had been replaced, active in the dark side of the Freedom City. However, a large number of demons who had sneaked into the higher-ups were lured into the building by an order. By the time the demons sensed that something was wrong and sent out the news, it was already too late. The government building's barrier prevented them from rescuing in time. When Dake and the others appeared at the door, they were preparing to attack the barrier. Even though there were already demons controlling magical beasts to attack the city outside, the demons who had sneaked into the city should have cooperated with them from the inside and outside to break the city as soon as possible. However, the demons in the building were very important for them to take over the city after breaking the city. Humans couldn't allow the demons to control the Freedom City. They needed a group of demons who had successfully disguised themselves as humans. Dark stood at the entrance, separated from the thousands of demons by only a barrier. Behind him was the tall City Lord Montefiore, as well as a group of higher-ups from the Freedom Capital who were preparing to rush to the Western City Gate. I'll open a path. City Lord Montefiore walked past him, her fiery red hair swaying in the wind. Her slightly boorish face was brimming with pride. The battle with the rock rhinoceros hybrids had cleared her mind, sweeping away all the pent-up frustrations she'd accumulated during this time. Once the environment settled down, people became unable to bear the sight of death. During times of war, there were days when companions disappeared forever. She shouldn't have been hindered in this situation. But a hand stopped her. "I'll do it," Dake said, raising his hand. Long before the meeting began, the humans outside the government building had already been asked to leave by the city guards. At a glance, they were all demons. Naturally, it was the first time he'd seen so many demons gathered together. What appeared in his mind were the various species of demons recorded in books. Then his first thought was that it was very heterogeneous. The demons blocking the government building were very heterogeneous in terms of species composition. And their behavior didn't seem at all like the remnants of the demons who'd managed to survive until now under the 100 Races Alliance's search. Did number 2 make them? I wonder how many of them are finished products. And how many of them are finished products? Dake's magic automatically surged to his brain, and his perception quickly spread out. He actually sensed a large number of auras that weren't weaker than the sand dragons among the nearly 1,000 demons. Among them, there were even individuals whose strength surpassed the sand dragons, having the strength of a 7 or 8-star magic guide elf. Dake only muttered to himself for a moment, then pulled out 2 magic guide cards from his card pack. This time, no one stopped him. His movements were extremely fast. For an archmage proficient in duels, the well-practiced card drawing and summoning sometimes gave people the feeling of instant casting by the magicians of the old era. It was just that fast. In the name of Dake Dim-Eng, Magic Guide summons, Primordial Dragon Egg. Only 3 seconds later, a blazing light of summoning lit up in front of him. The demons outside the building suddenly became alert. "Kill him. Don't let him continue summoning." They shouted in a language that didn't belong to humans, but Dake could understand. Surging murderous intent surged like a tide. The archmages of this era were constantly displaying their strength through magic guide duels. The Demon King execution ceremony in the middle of the year had already proven this. Even the remnants of the demons hidden in the dark were already learning magic guide technology. However, the cutting edge of magic guide technology only existed in a few academies, and a technological barrier had already formed inside and outside the academies. As for the archmages who graduated from the academies, the resources they could obtain outside couldn't even support their own experiments, to the point that they were reduced to participating in magic guide duels to obtain research funds. This showed that they didn't have much to spare. The quickest time for an archmage was in the academies. Only after leaving the academies could they understand how precious a student's life was. The remnants of the demons didn't have the prerequisite to grasp the most advanced magic guide technology. However, this didn't prevent them from forming a basic understanding of magic guide technology. And after receiving their teachings, the demons in front of them naturally knew the best way to deal with an archmage. That was, just like dealing with a magician, before he could summon any magic guide elf, crush him into pieces. However, it was really too difficult to do this. A qualified archmage's summoning time was only 3 seconds. It was too difficult to kill the archmage before he completed his summoning. There was a flash of light. A huge dragon egg appeared in front of everyone. Without Dake's instructions, Ali summoned a light element shield that was 4 to 5 meters wide, protecting the dragon egg and everyone behind it. Ali was an archmage. Although she specialized in the armed type, it was impossible for her to only have armed cards. The strength of this protective light wall was equivalent to a 6-star magic guide elf with 3,000 defense and 2,000 magic power. Facing an attack that was generally less than 3,000, it could more or less resist. As long as it could resist this attack, the green-eyed dragon whelp would naturally break out of the egg. Roar! A tender but long dragon cry rushed out of the dragon egg. The green-eyed dragon whelp flapped its wings and flew out of the dragon egg. The second summoning light followed closely behind and appeared beside it. In the name of Dake Dim-Eng, I summon Fantasy Beast, Fusion Curse Creature, Dragon. Fantasy Beast, Fusion Curse Creature, Dragon. Dragon Fusion, including the fusion materials referred to by Fusion Curse Creature, Dragon. Offer this set of fusion materials as a sacrifice, and you can specially summon the corresponding Dragon Elemental Magic Guide Elf of this set of fusion materials. Fantasy Beast, Fusion Curse Creature, Dragon, that recorded the information of Curse Cage, Sub-Beast, could be fused with the green-eyed dragon whelp, without the need of fusion cards. Dake held the magic guide card in his hand, and an increasing amount of magic power poured into it like a flood, filling the container in a few seconds. The huge ball of light that depicted the dragon's curse was projected toward the body of the green-eyed dragon whelp, and suddenly drilled in. A huge and complicated fusion summoning circle appeared under the feet of the green-eyed dragon whelp, and the huge draconic aura that was released as it broke out of the egg suddenly became violent. Its body was undergoing a drastic change after fusing with the power of fantasy beast, fusion curse creature, dragon. Roar! In the majestic and terrifying dragon roar, the violent draconic aura suddenly crushed toward the infernals in front of it without restraint. The huge difference in status caused the lower-ranked infernals to have a very serious feeling of suffocation. In the sky above their heads, the extremely oppressive aura condensed into layers of dark clouds. The pitch-black night fell, and the aura became more and more oppressive. The wings of the green-eyed dragon whelp turned into green-yellow light wings during the fusion process, and the beautiful silver-white dragon scales were stained with a heavy metal version of the dark color. But even if it was so oppressive and heavy, its body still emitted the aura of light. It was like the last ray of light that stubbornly persisted in the darkness. The young tyrant was summoned in a short 10 seconds and descended into the world just like that. Compared to the traditional giant dragons, the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp's body was not huge, and its round appearance revealed a cuteness that did not match the violent aura at all. But a tyrant was a tyrant. Roar! Facing the malice of the infernals, the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp was furious on the spot. A tide of blood red and darkness emerged from the depths of its eyes, and its attack power that was originally as high as 3,500 points increased to its limit in the state of fury, and in the blink of an eye, it rose to 7,000 points. Release the dragon's aura, green-eyed aura. Dake ordered with a calm tone. The dragon's aura that was several times more terrifying than the dragon's aura that was released naturally before instantly erupted like a flood that broke through a dam. The infernals that were charging towards the entrance of the government office building, the infernals that were releasing magic attacks from their original positions, and the infernals that were controlling the infernals to swarm over, in that instant, they were covered by the dragon's aura, and their entire being felt as if a mountain was pressing down on them. Their hearts that had not experienced any hardships immediately produced a strong reaction of fear. Close to 1,000 infernals gathered outside the government office building, their bodies trembling, unable to move, and unable to attack. Dake raised his hand at that instant, and pointed his index finger straight at the sky. Green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp, destructive explosive gale bullet. Roar! The furious roar of the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp resounded through the clouds, and countless rays of light gathered from all directions, condensing into a highly compressed energy ball in front of its dragon mouth. The surrounding light seemed to have completely disappeared, and only that ball of light was bright and dazzling. From that ball of light, a terrifying fluctuation that seemed to want to destroy everything was emitted. Even the higher-ups of the Freedom Capital standing behind Dake felt as if they were facing an abyssal demon dragon, and trembled. Destructive explosive gale bullet. When the rays of light were compressed to the limit, the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp suddenly spat out that energy ball. Like a scorching sun, the energy ball that stole the radiance of the moon suddenly exploded in the midst of the infernals that were unable to move. Boom! With the support of Tyrant, the destructive explosive gale bullet, that had an attack power of 8,000 points, caused devastating damage to the close to 1,000 infernals that had gathered together. Although the vitality of a true powerhouse was stronger than that of an ordinary magic fairy, they also had a flaw that magic fairies did not have. Without a head, without a heart, they would die. Without a hand, without a leg, they would lose the ability to fight. After this destructive explosive gale bullet, even if there were still infernals that could fight, they were no longer a threat. Dake did not have too much of an emotional fluctuation because of what he saw. He stood on the spot for about half a minute, waiting for the aftermath of the destructive explosive gale bullet to disperse, and also waiting for the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp's 30 seconds of stiffness to pass. When the energy within the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp's body that had become chaotic after releasing the destructive explosive gale bullet stabilized, he suddenly flipped over and rode on the dragon's back. Although the green-eyed tyrant dragon whelp's back was not wide, it was enough for him alone. Let's go to the west. Tyrant dragon whelp. In the next moment, the wyvern that was circling above the government office building flew down and carried Olga, Angra, Eve, Sister Carlien, and City Lord Montefiore. The wyvern that was unable to bear the unbearable weight flapped its wings and flew towards the west. The higher-ups of the Freedom City that were left behind naturally would not go around in circles. They did not need to be arranged. A portion of them immediately rushed towards the infernals that were still alive to eliminate them. A portion of them immediately went to the stables and rode to their posts. There was also a portion that flew up and chased after the city lord to the west. The battle in the west was in full swing. It had been more than half an hour since the infernals were discovered to be attacking the city. The infernals had already arrived at the city. The guards in charge of the city gates tried their best to let in the adventurers from outside the city. However, when the infernals got close to the danger zone, they could only helplessly close the city gates and let the adventurers escape from the two sides. Perhaps they could enter from the north and south gates. The Flaming Sun Army of the Sun Moon Army had already gathered at the west gate. However, since their army commander was not around, they did not act rashly. They only focused on defending. The other Ice Moon Army split into two groups and guarded the north and south gates. During this half an hour, the ones who were truly responsible for guarding the city were Professor Shi Erfu and the others who were floating above the city gates. Sarah Shi Erfu, Pawa Cheong Si, Lili Laplace, and Stephen Harvey. The combat abilities of these four professors were undoubtedly at the top of the Shang Malian Academy. The infernals that seemed to want to flatten the entire city were forcibly blocked by them outside the moat. When thousands of infernals entered their field of vision, countless people were frightened to death. However, Professor Lili Laplace revealed an extremely excited smile. Her laughter was like that of a fairy in the night. She was a fairy in the first place. She did not even move a finger. Suddenly, some of the infernals in the infernals broke free from some kind of shackle and pounced towards the other infernals around them. Those infernals who turned into traitors under the influence of the fairy's natural charm went against the tide and led the first wave of infernals into chaos. Professor Li quickly flapped the dragonfly wings on her back. She flew around excitedly in the shape of an 8 in the air. Professor Sarah Shi Erfu wanted to pull her back because it was too dangerous. However, her reins were already broken. No one could pull her back. Professor Shi Erfu could only let Professor Cheong Si cover her while he quickly took out a magic card and calmly summoned the infernals amidst their roars. In the name of Sarah Shi Erfu, I summon the infernals. Pillar of Gale. It was not a magic elven card, but an item card. The Pillar of Gale, that could be summoned with a large amount of magic, was 12 meters tall. Professor Shi Erfu placed it on the 50-meter tall wall. The Pillar of Gale was especially eye-catching. From the bottom to the top, there was a circular hole in every meter of the Pillar of Gale. With a total of 24 holes as the center, a circular array was engraved that radiated outward. At the top of the Pillar of Gale, there was an equilateral triangle, and there was a hole in each of the three corners of the equilateral triangle. After summoning the Pillar of Gale, Professor Sylph raised her hand and pinched her index finger and thumb into the air, pinching the air between her pale golden hair. Then, 1, 2, 3, a total of 3 wind elves, flew out and danced around her finger happily. She flicked her finger and pointed at the 3 wind elves, one by one. The 3 wind elves immediately understood what she meant and quickly flew toward the top of the Pillar of Gale. Then, they sat in the 3 holes in the equilateral triangle one by one. When the 3 wind elves sat down, the array engraved on the Pillar of Gale lit up, and the 12 holes in the Pillar of Gale spewed out strong gusts of air. Professor Shi Erfu placed her hand on the Pillar of Gale, and the gusts of air changed direction from east to west. In the next moment, a storm howled. A terrifyingly strong gale, with the wall as the boundary, appeared outside the western city gate without any warning. The magical beast tide, which had been crazily charging from the west to the east, had actually been overturned by this gale. The demon beasts at the front tried their best to scratch the ground, but they only left deep scratches on the ground before they were blown away like balls. If it was a magical beast with a larger surface area, it would be blown away by this gust of wind. Those huge magical beasts that weighed several tons had probably never enjoyed such a light treatment in their entire lives. In this frightening gale, they were like kites made of paper, flying higher and higher, higher and higher. Professor Lely covered his belly and laughed out loud. Even Professor Jones and Professor Harvey couldn't help but smile as they were overwhelmed by the joy. However, Professor Shi-Erfu was still serious. She stared at the demon camp behind the demon beast tide. Her wind tentacles were cut off at that camp. At the city gate, the adventurers who didn't have time to enter the city panicked. This terrifying demon beast tide had never appeared outside the Freedom City before, and they were dominated by fear. As the demon beast tide quickly approached, the adventurers could already see the horrifying scene of them being crushed into minced meat. However, when they were about to die, they suddenly heard gusts of wind howling in their ears. They suddenly opened their eyes and saw the demon beast tide going against the flow and getting further and further away from the city gate. This miraculous scene was unforgettable for them. Then, a gust of air rose from under their feet and carried them up into the sky. In this dreamlike floating feeling, countless adventurers who didn't manage to enter the city escaped death and were sent to the top of the city wall that was 50 to 60 meters high by the rising air. The adventurers who woke up immediately jumped to the top of the wall and then sat down on the ground, exhausted. Wind God bless them. Roar. In the 6th minute of the demon beast tide's reversal, a horrifying beast roar came from the other side of the demon beast tide. A huge demon beast that was 20 meters tall rushed out with mountain-like footsteps. Chapter 767. What's that? The adventurers sitting on the wall were abruptly awakened by the heavy footsteps, and they all subconsciously got up to look. They saw that the giant beast had the body of a bear and the head of a tiger, and the tail dragging behind it was like a giant python. Its 4 limbs were on the ground as it galloped forward. At this moment, it was already 20 meters tall. If it stood upright, it could probably easily reach the top of the city wall. The Freedom Capital had already resisted many magical beast tides, and it had faced countless giant beasts. Because of this, they had built a huge city wall that was over 50 meters tall. However, in all these years, this was the first time the people in the city had seen a supergiant beast that was so huge. In the past, giant beasts that were 20 meters tall when they stood upright were already huge. But today, this giant beast was 20 meters tall when it lay down. The city wall was like an empty shell to such a giant beast. Every step it took shook the earth and the mountains. How did it hide outside? Under the gazes of countless pairs of eyes, that giant beast actually endured the terrifying gale that could blow other magical beasts away and kept running. Its appearance was like a stabilizing force in the magical beast tide. The originally panicked beasts at the back actually calmed down. Almost immediately, a giant bird with a wingspan of 30 meters suddenly flew over from afar. It flew so fast that it created a sonic boom. It could be said that it was accompanied by a storm and was like thunder. Remember, https://m Vipkanchu. VIP. After it appeared, the violent airflow between heaven and earth also became disturbed. It's the Earth Bear and the Thunder Rock. Even Professor Shi-Erfu couldn't help but frown after seeing these 2 giant beasts. She wasn't afraid of these 2 giant beasts, but she sensed that the scale of this magical beast attack was probably unprecedentedly large. Whether it was the Earth Bear or the Thunder Rock, they were just appetizers. Coupled with the chaos caused by the demons infiltrating the city. If they hadn't happened to be here, the Freedom Capital would have been destroyed. Of course, the source of this upheaval might also be them. Thus, even if it was for the sake of karma, they should still take action. Power. Professor Shi-Erfu called out Professor Cheong-Si's name softly. The latter gave a brief response and began to summon him. Using the Pillar of Gale, to create a gale to stop the enemy was just a temporary measure. It was to forcefully resolve the first wave of attacks from the beast horde. Even the magical beast tide wouldn't be able to continuously launch attacks as ferocious as the first wave. Once he took back his dominant position, he would be able to display his advantages as an archmage. In the name of Pawa Cheong Si, I summon the strong preying on the weak. Following the emergence of the summoning light, a fence suddenly appeared behind Professor Pawa Cheong Si. The fence was half a meter high and was more of a formality. Within the fences, one after another, carnivorous animals jumped out of the summoning light. These animals were of various sizes, but each of them was as fat as a domestic pig. Some of the birds that were too fat to fly even had 6 or 7 pairs of wings on their backs. Professor Cheong Si paused for a moment before continuing to use a magic card with the same name. However, the strong preying on the weak in front was an army-type magic card, while the strong preying on the weak at the back was an extremely rare mystic card. Under the mystic effect of the strong preying on the weak animals collided with each other in the magic array and fused into an even larger mountain of meat. These weak animals went from 2-star to 4-star, and from 4-star to 8-star. In the blink of an eye, the largest animal was lying in the middle like a small mountain. After that, Professor Cheong Si used these weak animals as sacrifices and began the summoning sacrifice. With an 8-star strong preying on the weak, and a 2-star strong preying on the weak, as sacrifices, summoning sacrifice, Rock Armor Giant Bear. In this battle formation, the flashy summoning method was far inferior to the stable and high-yield summoning method. Professor Cheong Si's strong preying on the weak was his exclusive magic card. It might not be that useful in a magic duel, but in a protected battlefield, it was a very powerful magic card. She held the Rock Armor Giant Bear card in front of her chest and narrowed her eyes at the Earth Bear that was quickly approaching. The corner of her mouth curved up slightly. The demon camp led by Demon King No. 2 was planning in a camp somewhere after the beast tide, while they stood on the city wall facing each other from afar. The vast territory between the two seemed to have become the battlefield for the duel. Looking at it this way, it did look a little like a magic duel. The Rock Armor Giant Bear, that was 15 to 16 meters tall, appeared under the city wall and in front of the moat from the summoning sacrifice. When its feet touched the ground, the power of the earth gathered crazily towards its body. A rock armor that was as hard as steel appeared on its body. Professor Cheong Si once again took out a magic card called Gargantuan from his card bag. In the name of Pawa Cheong Si, magic summoning, Gargantuan. A huge amount of magic power surged into the Gargantuan magic card in his hand like a flood. It was only completely filled after a full half a minute. A crimson-red circle appeared under the Rock Armor Giant Bear's feet. A huge amount of energy poured into the Rock Armor Giant Bear's body through Gargantuan, and its body that was already large enough grew even more. 16 meters, 17 meters, 18 meters, all the way to 36 meters. The Rock Armor Giant Bear's height had more than doubled, and its body had also become several times bigger. From afar, it was no weaker than the Earth Bear on the opposite side. Both of them were giant bears with the ground attribute, and they were evenly matched. Professor Cheong Si resisted the urge to rush into the battlefield and fight the giant beast. He only extended his right hand and ordered the Rock Armor Giant Bear to charge. Boom! The Rock Armor Giant Bear hammered the ground. After Gargantuan, its attack that exceeded 10,000 points tore the ground apart. However, with it as the center, the power of the earth quickly gathered and mended the crack at an extremely fast speed. It roared excitedly like its owner and charged towards the Earth Bear on the opposite side. Gargantuan doubled its attack and lowered its defense by the same amount. However, with rock armor, the lowered defense would be replenished, and the endless power of the earth would also allow it to gain high-speed self-healing ability. Although the length of its health bar might not be as long as the Earth Bear, it was definitely not weak in terms of toughness. Whoosh! The wind howled. The Thunder Rock hovered in the air 3,000 meters away. It flapped its wings and suddenly let out a long cry. Suddenly, there were bursts of thunder in the night sky, and the wind blew in reverse. The wind from the gale pillar was cancelled out, and the demon beasts gathered under the pressure of the two giant beasts. They once again charged towards the city gate. Going against the seemingly unstoppable tide, the Rock Armor Giant Bear charged forward. After trampling countless demon beasts to death, it finally intercepted the Earth Bear, 2,000 meters away from the city wall. The two giant bears didn't care at all and fiercely collided with each other. It was like mountains colliding, and the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Even the thunder from the Thunder Rock was covered by the sound. The energy waves created by the collision easily devoured the life force of the demon beasts nearby. The power of the earth caused a whirlpool-like energy wave on the ground. Instantly, within a few hundred meters of them, there was an empty space without any living creatures. On the top of the city wall, the holes in the gale pillar suddenly stopped spewing out air. Instead, they started to absorb air. A visible wind vortex appeared above Professor Shi Erfu's head. The wind element energy waves gradually spread out and became more and more terrifying. Floating on the top of the city wall, she faced the Thunder Rock from a distance and slowly raised her right hand. Where her fingertip pointed, the wind element suddenly gathered. The golden-haired elf that looked like it was made from the same mold slowly opened its eyes in the wind element vortex. The wind stopped flowing. 12-star magic guide elf. Wind Elf King, Shi Erfu. Floating above Professor Shi Erfu's head, the Wind Elf King had white jade-like feet, and a cool breeze flowed around it, emitting a green-white light. It was wearing the traditional costume of the elf clan, but the size of its chest didn't look traditional at all. Its long hair was light golden, and the long ears that popped out from the golden hair were even longer than Professor Shi Erfu's. It looked like a pure-blood elf. However, other than its ears, its facial features were exactly the same as Professor Shi Erfu's. It was delicate and beautiful. A green wind rune flashed between its eyebrows. Its expression was gentle and graceful. From the outside, it looked like a pure-blood gentle version of Professor Shi Erfu. However, that impression was instantly overturned after it raised its right hand and pointed its palm to the sky. A spear made of pure wind elemental energy instantly took shape in the midst of the sudden appearance of the storm. Then, without any condensation, the long spear that was more than 10 meters long shot out explosively. Bang! The sound of a sonic boom exploded on the spot. A bloody hole suddenly appeared in the chest and abdomen of the Thunder Rock. The blood didn't even have time to flow out. Roar! The sharp pain that was transmitted to the nerves after a moment of delay caused the Thunder Rock to suddenly let out a shrill bestial roar. The adventurers and soldiers on the city wall who were staring at it didn't realize that the Thunder Rock had been severely injured. They only felt that the Thunder Rock was about to pounce over after roaring angrily. However, to everyone's surprise, just as its roar rushed into the sky, it suddenly turned around and fled in panic. At this moment, the Wind Elemental King, Shi Erfu's fingertips had condensed a second, Wind Elemental Spear. He frowned slightly and glanced at the rock armor giant bear and the earth bear that were fighting in the middle of the beast horde. His slender finger jumped again and gently flicked toward a farther place. The Wind Elemental Spear that was spinning at high speed disappeared again in the sonic boom. In a secret place that no one could see, the tall demon's toes were off the ground as he stood in the air. His skin was dark and glossy. His long hair was black and soft, and his face was extremely tough. The demon horns that protruded from both sides of his head were like goat horns. A pair of bat wings were half open and half closed on his back. A long lizard-like tail wrapped around his waist, exuding a faint pressure. Alistair Eldridge. It was his name when he was alive. It was different from what everyone who had guessed its existence had imagined. Alistair Eldridge knew very well that he was already dead. The word death was originally meaningless to it. But he was indeed already dead, because he was a demon king that was born from a corpse. No one could imagine that Alistair Eldridge knew very well that he was not his original body. He was a demon king that was created from the corpse of his original body by the Holy Church with a special secret method. Alistair Eldridge was sure that he had never thought of such a possibility when he was alive. A few months ago, he completed his reincarnation in a container hidden in the territory of the demons. Because he was created from a corpse, he was pulled into the gate of the underworld again. He died for the second time. It had to be said that this was also a death that Alistair Eldridge didn't expect when he was alive. But he did come back to life. After sensing the existence of his original body that was thousands of miles away, he further confirmed his identity. He was a demon king that was born from a corpse. He was the shadow of the real demon king. He couldn't replace the real demon king. So, he named himself Number 2. Of course, this was a name that he only used for himself when he was thinking. In front of outsiders and his few remaining subordinates, he was still Alistair Eldridge, a demon king that had successfully reincarnated. He was a shadow that only Number 1 and Number 2 knew. So, after sensing that Number 1 came to the City of Freedom in the territory of the demons from thousands of miles away, he knew that he had a new mission. Number 1's aura was very weak. It was not like him, who had recovered to a relatively complete state. Although for some unknown reasons, he was different from Number 1 in some aspects, and there was also a difference in the most important, demon cultivation, his current state was obviously much better than Number 1. It turned out that Number 1 was not accumulating, hiding, and scheming thousands of miles away, but was captured again? He thought so, and today's matter happened. As Number 2, he must save Number 1 at any cost. Behind Alistair Eldridge stood a total of 8 demons. The figures and auras of these 8 demons were all different, but they all wore black robes and masks, covering all the parts of their bodies that might be exposed to the outside world. This was not Alistair Eldridge's request, but a habit that they had developed over the past decade or so. They were very cautious, which was why they had lived until now and waited for their king as they wished. What followed was naturally to build high walls, amass food, and slowly proclaim themselves king. The City of Freedom had ready-made walls and an endless supply of food. So they needed to plan for the City of Freedom, trying to use the method of replacement, without the smoke of gunpowder corroding and swallowing up the home of the hybrids surrounded by high walls. Occupying the City of Freedom was an especially important part of the demons' path to revitalization. On this point, their king had reached a complete consensus with them. Although for some reason, their king had forgotten many things, and the demons that had been cultivated with the blood of the demon king also had a great flaw. But they treated this as the price for the reincarnation of the demon king, as well as the negative effects of insufficient resources. As long as we occupy the City of Freedom, we can obtain enough resources to make up for these flaws and allow those noble demons that have been exterminated by humans to once again reign over the world. With this thought, they offered their loyalty to Alistair Eldridge. But all of this had suddenly changed today. Without any foreshadowing, the sudden change caught them off guard. At noon, their king suggested that the spies they had hidden in the City of Freedom should be mobilized, even mobilizing those humans who had been replaced by demons to search for a person they had no information about. For the first time, they were singing a different tune to their king. Because once such a large-scale mobilization of people occurred, their painstaking planning would go down the drain. Even if the city lord of the City of Freedom couldn't do anything to them, they had actually begun to pay attention to the City of Freedom many years ago. Naturally, they knew very well that this seemingly isolated city had always been the center of attention of all the major powers. So they had always been very careful in their planning. Unfortunately, the demons cultivated by Alistair Eldridge had a natural flaw, causing their plan to be exposed and being discovered by the city lord of the City of Freedom. But those flaws, under the current circumstances, were still within an acceptable range. And the progress of the plan was actually very good. Even the 2 Legion commanders of the Sun-Moon Legion had been parasitized by the Brain Fluid Demon and had been subtly influenced by the Brain Fluid Demon. They were not in a hurry and planned little by little, silently turning the City of Freedom into the first stop of the demon race's revitalization. But their king suddenly became radical today. In order to not let their painstaking planning go down the drain, they argued for what was right. Fortunately, their king was someone who could accept opinions. After Alistair Eldridge's suggestion at noon, he accepted the advice of his subordinates and retracted his impulsive order. But Alistair Eldridge's cooling-off period only lasted until 3 in the afternoon. At that time, Number 1 was released again and sent a distress signal to it. Alistair Eldridge couldn't help it. He knew what he had to do. Even if he had to give up everything he had accumulated over this period of time, he had to save Number 1. So he showed his subordinates what was called the majesty of a demon king. Therefore, it stood its ground against the opinions of the masses and launched this general attack without any foreshadowing at dusk. Alistair Eldridge's subordinates were also forced to show their loyalty to their king. Although they were unwilling, they still did their best to prepare for the magical beast tide. And before dusk, something happened in the City of Freedom that caught them off guard. The city lord of the City of Freedom called for an emergency meeting. 80% of the management personnel were summoned to a government building. Then, the liquidation of the City of Freedom began in a way that they could not have imagined. When they realized that their plan was on the verge of collapse, they finally agreed with Alistair Eldridge's plan to attack the city. Since the plan was doomed to fail, they might as well destroy the city with a thunderous momentum, rescue their companions trapped in the city, loot all the resources in the city, and turn the cowardly humans into slaves. Then, they would push them into the depths of their territory as quickly as possible and hide again. No one would be stupid enough to suggest letting the Demon King announce his return at this time. All the demons who had suggested this were already dead. As a result, the war started without any warning. Just like the wind elemental spear that suddenly appeared in front of them, without warning. "Your Majesty!" A devilish being abruptly raised his head as soon as he sensed a gust of wind, and a hint of horror appeared in his crimson eyes. Alistair Eldridge No. 2 had already raised his hand before the demon race's shout could be heard. He tried to grab the wind elemental spear at the first moment and throw it back in the most powerful way possible. It would be best if it could pierce through the half-elf floating on the city wall. On the surface, the Shang Malian Academy was absolutely neutral. Therefore, even at the most intense time of the war, very few professors would leave the academy and set foot on the battlefield. Although Professor Shi Erfu was not weaker than the Golden Generation at that time, he had never appeared on the battlefield. Almost none of the demons who invaded the academy and tried to cut off the future of the human race could return alive. Therefore, Alistair Eldridge did not know that such a powerful half-elf existed in this world. He quickly stretched out his right hand to grab the wind elemental spear, but almost as soon as it touched the wind on the spear, it was sucked in and crushed by the wind. The magic that covered his right hand seemed to have never existed. After crushing his right hand, the wind elemental spear did not stop at all and continued forward, piercing through his right chest. Pooh! Alistair Eldridge suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked down and saw a huge bloody hole in his chest, causing him to reveal an expression of disbelief. Behind him, the two demons who were in the path of the wind elemental spear quickly scattered. The wind elemental spear pierced through the ground, and after it went deep into the ground, it suddenly exploded. The magic barrier of this hidden place was instantly torn apart. "Your Majesty!" A few of the Devil Race soldiers who had just come to their senses immediately rushed forward. Alistair Eldridge raised his left hand and stopped them from getting closer. "It's the Wind Elf King, Shi Erfu." He gritted his teeth and said the name of the Wind Elf King. The bloody hole in his right hand and right chest healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Kaboom! The thunder rock, that was fleeing in panic, flew over their heads, bringing with it the sound of thunder. It's the end of the month. Vote, don't let it rot. Last 3 days. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.